Hey there, tonight we're diving into the life of a knight during the 100 Years' War, where the truth is, the clang of armor was often overshadowed by the quiet challenges of survival and duty amidst centuries-old conflicts. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. The chill of an English dawn seeps through the stone walls of your castle, the kind of cold that even a roaring fire can't quite chase away. You're a knight in 1346, and today, like every day, you'll be donning armor worth more than some people see in a lifetime. 4 years' worth of a craftsman's wages, to be exact. That's what you're strapping onto your body. It's not just a suit of armor, it's a walking fortune, a medieval status symbol, and, quite literally, your life insurance policy rolled into one. As you rise from your wooden bed, the drafty room reminds you that castles aren't the cozy, luxurious homes we've been led to believe. Forget those fairy tales. Living in a fortress means dealing with damp air and stubborn winds. But hey, at least you're not sleeping on a dirt floor like the peasants outside your gates. Count your blessings, right? Anyway, it's time to gear up. Your squire, a young lad hoping to become a knight himself one day, helps you into your armor. This isn't a one-man job, after all. First, there's the padded undergarment called a gambeson. It's thick and quilted, a medieval version of bubble wrap to cushion your body from the inevitable blows. Then comes the chainmail, a jangling shirt of interlinked rings that weighs as much as a small child. Finally, the piece de resistance, your plate armor, custom-fitted to you like a second, metallic skin. Now let's talk numbers. Your armor might weigh around 50 pounds, give or take. That's like carrying a couple of large bags of flour on your body, and you'll be expected to fight, ride, and maybe even run in it. Sounds glamorous, doesn't it? But this isn't just about looks or protection. It's an economic statement. Your family has invested heavily in this shining suit, and while it gleams with the promise of chivalric honor, it's also a stark reminder of your financial obligations. This armor has to last, because replacing it would be like buying a new car today, a serious hit to the family coffers. Maintaining your equipment is as crucial as maintaining your sword arm. Armor needs constant care to prevent rust, a knight's sworn enemy. The blacksmith in your retinue is just as important as any soldier, tasked with keeping your gear battle-ready. And let's not forget the economic burden on your family. They've shelled out a small fortune to outfit you, hoping you'll return with both glory and the spoils of war to make it all worthwhile. But hold on a minute. Let's pump the brakes on this notion of knights as noble, chivalric heroes. The reality is, medieval warfare is a messy, brutal affair. The so-called chivalric codes, those romantic ideals of honor and fair play, often take a backseat when arrows fly and swords clash. Sure, a knight's supposed to protect the weak and uphold justice, but in the heat of battle, survival is the name of the game. It's less about rescuing damsels and more about staying alive and keeping your limbs intact. As you clank your way through the castle corridors, you can't help but think about the contradictions of a knight's life. You're a warrior, yes, but also part of a feudal system that ties you to the land and to your lord. Loyalty is expected, but it's hard not to notice how alliances shift faster than the clouds overhead. One day you're fighting the French, the next, you might be allied with them, all thanks to some political marriage or treaty. This morning ritual of gearing up is a constant reminder of your place in this medieval hierarchy. Your armor is both a privilege and a burden, a symbol of your status and the weight of expectations on your shoulders. And while it might shine bright in the morning sun, it's also a reminder that beneath the gleaming surface, being a knight in the 100 Years' War is anything but glamorous. With your armor secure and your squire at your side, you're ready to face whatever the day and history throws your way. With your armor secure and your squire at your side, you're ready to face whatever the day and history throws your way. Today, it's time to ride out and join your fellow knights, preparing for the Battle of Crecy. This won't be your average backyard brawl. It's a pivotal showdown in the 100 Years' War, a conflict that's been dragging on longer than the plot of a bad soap opera. Mounting your trusty steed, you can't help but appreciate the irony. Here you are, armored like a tank, about to face an enemy whose numbers could make even your bravest ancestor break a sweat. The English army, your team, is outnumbered, facing a French force that's like a medieval all-star lineup. But don't let that scare you. It didn't scare Edward Roman III, the English king, who's leading this charge. He's gambling on strategy over sheer numbers, which sounds like a risky move, more like playing chess when the other guy's playing checkers. Now, let's talk strategy. The Battle of Crecy is all about the high ground and innovative tactics, not just brute force. The English army has positioned itself on a slight rise. It's not Everest, but in medieval combat, even a small hill can feel like a mountain when you're charging uphill in heavy armor. The terrain is your ally, a natural advantage that's worth more than its weight in gold, or, say, in the ransom of a captured nobleman. And then there's the English longbowmen. Imagine Robin Hood's crew with better aim and a license to kill. These guys are the secret weapon, medieval equivalent of a missile strike. With a range of up to 250 yards, the longbow can rain arrows down on the enemy before they're even close enough to shout insults. It's not just the distance, it's the rate of fire. A skilled archer can shoot about 10 arrows a minute, and with thousands of archers, you're looking at a storm of arrows that could block out the sun. It's like the 14th century version of a hailstorm, but with more lethal consequences. The French, on the other hand, are banking on their cavalry, knights in shining armor ready to charge. It's a romantic image, isn't it? All that galloping glory, except here it's more like galloping into a wall of pointy sticks. The English have planted wooden stakes in front of their position to thwart cavalry charges. So, while the French knights are dreaming of heroic charges, they're actually more likely to get skewered than to skewer. But let's not forget the mud. Yes, mud. The battlefield is a quagmire, thanks to a recent downpour. Picture this: heavy armor, a slippery battlefield, and horses trying to keep their footing. It's a recipe for chaos, and not the good kind. It's like trying to dance on ice wearing steel boots. The romantic notion of knights clashing in noble combat is as far from reality as a medieval map is from accurate geography. As the battle unfolds, it becomes a chaotic, muddy mess, with the kind of brutality that makes you question why anyone ever thought this was glamorous. Forget about elegant swordplay. It's more about blunt force trauma and trying not to get trampled. The French, despite their numbers, find themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned, literally, by English archers and tacticians. But let's not sugarcoat the aftermath. If you're unlucky enough to get injured, brace yourself for the medieval version of medical care. Think primitive, think painful. Forget antiseptics and anesthesia. It's more like bite down on this stick and try not to scream. Wounds are cauterized with red-hot irons, and amputations are done with saws that look more suited to woodworking than surgery. It's enough to make you wish you'd stayed in bed that morning. The Battle of Crecy is a harsh reminder that the life of a knight isn't just about glory and honor. It's also about survival in a world that's as unforgiving as it is fascinating. And while the English victory is celebrated, it's not just a tale of triumph, but a testament to strategy, innovation, and let's face it, a fair bit of luck. As the sun sets on the battlefield, you're left with a grim realization. Beneath the romantic veneer of knighthood lies a reality that's muddy, bloody, and brutally honest. And while the history books might celebrate the heroes, it's the ground-level view that sticks with you. The chaos, the strategy, and the stark truth that in war, there are no guarantees. But hey, there's always tomorrow, and who knows what the next battle will bring. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over, and the 100 Years' War has plenty more chapters left to unfold. As the sun dips lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the battlefield, you find yourself longing for something far less romantic than victory or valor, a meal. Because let's face it, surviving a medieval skirmish on an empty stomach is about as appealing as attending a feast with no food. But hold your horses, literally. You'll need them for transport, and well, potentially dinner if things get desperate enough. Let's talk about the midday meal, a knight's version of grabbing a sandwich between meetings. Forget the sumptuous banquets of Arthurian legend. Today's menu is more trench stew than grand feast. The culinary reality on campaign is less Game of Thrones feast and more gamey broth from a questionable part. You're likely to find yourself slurping down a concoction that's a mystery even to the cook. It's a bit of whatever's available: salted meat, some root vegetables, maybe a stale loaf of bread if you're lucky. Fresh food is scarcer, than a peaceful resolution in medieval Europe. You might wonder why, in a world obsessed with feasting and plenty, knights put up with such meager rations. Well, it's all about logistics, my friend. Transporting food across a muddy, war-torn countryside isn't exactly a walk in the park. With no refrigeration, unless you count the cool embrace of English weather, preserving food is an epic battle in itself. Salt is your savior here, though it could also make your meal taste like you've seasoned it with the tears of your enemies. But before you get too comfortable imagining knights as the medieval Michelin critics, let's dig deeper into the social stew part of army life. Knightly camaraderie is often painted as a brotherhood of noble warriors, united by honor and shared dangers. The reality, it's more like a medieval frat house with a strict hierarchy. You're bound by feudal ties, but those bonds can snap under the pressure of class tensions. Nobles and common soldiers coexist out of necessity, not choice. Sure, there's camaraderie among knights. After all, shared suffering does wonders for bonding. You're in the thick of it together, dodging arrows and enduring the same bad meals. But don't be fooled into thinking it's all for one and one for all. The knights are in it for glory, land, and ransom money. The common foot soldier, he's just trying to survive another day, maybe earn a few coins, and avoid becoming a pincushion for arrows. The tension between the classes can simmer like an overcooked pot of stew. Knights might see themselves as the elite, destined for glory and the finer things in life. But when the arrows fly and the mud flies faster, the distinctions blur. In battle, the man next to you, be he noble or commoner, might be the one to save your life or watch your back. That's the gritty truth behind the romanticized tales of knightly brotherhood. And let's not even get started on the concept of a heroic death. The idea of dying gloriously in battle is as appealing as a rusty sword to the gut. In reality, it's messy, painful, and rarely dignified. The stakes are high, and losing your life, or your lunch, is an ever-present risk. So while the bards might sing of noble sacrifices, the knights themselves know that survival is the real victory. As you finish your meal, or what passes for one, you might find yourself pondering the peculiar mix of romance and reality that defines your life as a knight. It's a world where ideals and harsh truths collide like rival armies. And as you prepare to saddle up again, you're reminded that despite the myths and legends, the life of a knight is more than just shining armor and gallant deeds. It's a complex tapestry of duty, survival, and the occasional bit of trench stew. But hey, at least it's never boring. As you finish scraping the bottom of your trench stew bowl, let's be honest, more soup than stew, you're reminded that the afternoon promises more than just culinary delights. It's time to head back into the fray of battle, where the stakes are higher than a nobleman's tax bill. The Battle of Crecy isn't just a showdown. It's a medieval game of chess played with real kings and knights, and the occasional pawn who's definitely feeling like he's on the wrong side of the board. So, let's get tactical. The English, led by Edward Roman III, are all about using the lay of the land to their advantage. Positioning is key, and the English have snagged the medieval equivalent of premium seating, a slight rise that offers both a strategic advantage and a chance to keep mud out of your boots a bit longer. The French, meanwhile, are bringing the thunder with their cavalry, hoping to trample the English with sheer might and a lot of horsepower. But here's the kicker. They're charging uphill into a storm of arrows, like a medieval version of running with scissors. It's a bold move, Carton. Let's see how it plays out for them. Now, let's dive into the weaponry that's turning the tide. The English longbowmen are the rock stars of this concert, cranking out arrows faster than a bard can strum a lute. With a range of up to 250 yards, these missiles rain down with deadly precision. Each bow is a marvel of engineering, standing about 6 feet tall and capable of firing 10 arrows a minute, making them the machine guns of the 14th century. If you're a French knight charging at this wall of arrows, you might as well be wearing a sign that says target practice. But what about the knights themselves? Clad in armor that's basically medieval haute couture, they're the tanks of the battlefield. The thing is, all that metal doesn't just weigh you down physically, it's a psychological burden too. You're a walking investment after all. Lose your armor, or worse, your life, and your family's financial future takes a nosedive. No pressure, right? Here's where we bust another myth, the idea of knightly bravery as pure heroism. Sure, there's courage involved, but let's not kid ourselves. Survival is the name of the game. Every knight knows the real prize isn't just glory, it's the chance to capture a noble enemy. Why? Because a nobleman's ransom could change your fortunes faster than you can say feudal contract. It's the medieval equivalent of winning the lottery, except instead of picking numbers, you're picking off high-value targets. The economics of ransom culture are as cutthroat as the battle itself. Capture a knight or noble, and you've got yourself a human ATM. The ransom money can mean land, titles, or simply a pile of coin large enough to make Scrooge McDuck jealous. For a knight, bagging a noble opponent is like hitting the jackpot in a casino where the chips are people and the house always loses. But it's not all fun and games. The psychological toll is immense. Imagine the pressure of knowing that one wrong move could leave your family destitute. Each clash of swords is a reminder that you're not just fighting for glory or king, but for your own flesh and blood back home. It's a heavy burden, and no amount of chivalric code can lighten it. Let's pause for a moment to appreciate the irony here. The romantic image of knights as noble protectors is a bit skewed when you consider that a good day on the battlefield involves capturing a wealthy enemy and negotiating a fat ransom. It's less about gallant deeds and more about making sure the economics of war work in your favor. As the battle rages on, the chaos is palpable. The clash of metal, the screams of men and horses, the relentless rain of arrows. It's a symphony of destruction that tests the limits of human endurance. The mud, blood, and sweat blur the lines between valor and survival, and the battlefield becomes an equalizer, where noble birth matters less than the strength of your sword arm. As the sun begins to dip, casting long shadows over the field, you can't help but ponder the realities of knighthood. It's a life where the romance of chivalry meets the harsh truths of medieval warfare, and where the true victories are often measured not in lands or titles, but in the simple act of outliving your enemies. And while the history books may celebrate the heroes, it's the gritty, unvarnished reality of life on the battlefield that sticks with you. A reminder that beneath the armor and the pageantry lies a world that's as brutal as it is compelling. So, as you prepare for the next round of battle, remember that the 100 Years' War is far from over. The stakes are high, the challenge is relentless, and the stories that unfold are as varied and complex as the knights who live them. Stay tuned, because this chapter has more twists and turns than a knight's lance in a jousting match. And while the future remains uncertain, one thing is clear. In the world of knights, survival isn't just a goal, it's an art form. As you drag your weary body off the battlefield and back to your quarters, the adrenaline fades, and the day's events start replaying like a relentless loop in your mind. The clang of swords, the cries of fallen comrades, and the whistle of arrows linger in your ears. It's been a long day, and every bruise and scrape reminds you that knighthood isn't just a shiny page in a storybook. It's a grueling, often grim chapter of history. Back at your quarters, the stone walls feel more like a sanctuary than a fortress. You might be nursing a gash or two, the medieval equivalent of a paper cut on steroids. And if you're lucky enough to have avoided injury, there's still the mental fatigue, the kind that weighs heavier than your armor ever could. Knights aren't just warriors. They are survivors in a brutal game of life and death, where each battle is a reminder of their mortality. But let's zoom out a bit. You're not just a cog in the war machine. You're a player in the broader drama of the 100 Years' War, a conflict that's not just a series of battles, but a seismic event reshaping Europe. This war, stretching from 1337 to 1453, is like the medieval version of a marathon, with a few sprints thrown in. It's a clash of dynasties, a battle for thrones that echoes across the continent, leaving castles in ruins and economies in tatters. Your role as a knight is pivotal in this saga. You're not just swinging swords and collecting ransoms. You're an instrument of political change. The war catalyzes the rise of national identities, a time when people start thinking of themselves as English or French, not just subjects of a local lord. It's the birth of nation-states, with all the messy, blood-soaked labor pains that entails. And let's talk about the economics of it all. War isn't cheap. It's a money pit that makes modern defense budgets look tame. The 100 Years' War sucks in resources like a black hole, draining coffers and leading to innovations in taxation. The English introduced the poll tax, a flat-rate tax that, unsurprisingly, makes them about as popular as a plague rat in a market square. Meanwhile, the French crown is borrowing from Lombard bankers like there's no tomorrow, with interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. For knights like you, there's more at stake than personal glory. Your actions on the battlefield ripple through the social fabric, influencing the rise and fall of fortunes and the shaping of future societies. You're part of the vanguard of change, even if your primary concern is keeping your head attached to your shoulders. Now, let's strip away the romantic veneer of knighthood. Those chivalric codes, the ones that talk about honor and fair play, they often fold under the harsh realities of war. Sure, there are moments of gallantry, like when a knight might offer mercy to a captured foe, but more often than not, it's a dog-eat-dog world. The battlefield is as much about self-preservation as it is about valor. If you're hoping for a tale of courtly love and noble deeds, you might want to look elsewhere, perhaps in the pages of a troubadour's song, where reality can afford to take a backseat to fantasy. So, let's not sugarcoat it. The life of a knight is as brutal as it is fascinating. You're a symbol of medieval romance, but you're also a weapon in the harsh realities of war. It's a duality that knights have to navigate daily, balancing the ideals of chivalry with the pragmatic demands of survival. Each day you don your armor, you're reminded that the shiny surface conceals a world of mud, blood, and bone. As you sit in your quarters, perhaps sipping on a cup of something stronger than water, you contemplate your place in this grand historical narrative. You're both a relic of a feudal past and a harbinger of a new world order. The 100 Years' War is an epic tale of ambition and betrayal, of crowns won and lost. And while it's a story that will inspire generations, for you, it's a lived reality, a testament to human resilience and the high cost of power. In the end, the legacy of knights like you is one of contrasts. You are the embodiment of both the romantic and the ruthless, the idealistic and the pragmatic. History will remember the battles won and lost, the kings crowned and dethroned, but it's the stories of those who lived through it, like you, that add texture to the tapestry of the past. As you drift into an uneasy sleep, the echoes of the day's battles still ringing in your ears, you know that tomorrow will bring new challenges and new stories. The 100 Years' War rages on, and with it, the opportunities and dangers that define the life of a knight. But for now, you rest, a warrior caught between the myths of the past and the stark realities of the present. The Seljuk Turks probably didn't start their journey with dreams of empire building as they roamed the Central Asian steppes. But hey, history is full of surprises. Let's rewind to the 10th century, a time when the Middle East was about as stable as a Jenga tower in an earthquake. The region was a hot mess of squabbling dynasties, rebellious vassals, and opportunistic warlords, all vying for a piece of the action. In this chaotic sandbox, the Seljuk Turks emerged from obscurity like a dark horse at a rigged race. Now, the Seljuks were originally part of a larger confederation of Oghuz Turks, a nomadic people who wouldn't have looked out of place in a Mad Max film, minus the motorbikes and rock guitars. These guys were tough, mobile, and had a knack for archery that would make Robin Hood look like a kid with a slingshot. By the 10th century, the Oghuz were nestled along the Sirdaria River, but a power struggle within their ranks sent a splinter group westward. Enter the Seljuks, named after their patriarch, Seljuk Bey, who, by all accounts, was a pretty savvy leader. In a move straight out of a Game of Thrones playbook, Seljuk Bey had a falling out with the ruling Oghuz chieftains and decided to take his clan on a road trip toward the more promising lands of Khorasan. By the time the Seljuks hit Khorasan, they found themselves in a region ripe for the picking. Abbasid Caliphate, once the heavyweight champ of the Islamic world, was now a shadow of its former self, its power fragmented among various local dynasties. In Khorasan, the Ghaznavids held sway, but their grip was slipping faster than a greased pig at a county fair. Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni had been a formidable ruler, but by 1030 he was busy being dead, leaving behind a shaky succession and a disgruntled populace. This was the Seljuks' cue to make a move. In 1037, the Seljuks captured Nishapur, a city that was a jewel of the Eastern Islamic world, known for its intellectual vibrancy and presumably decent kebabs. This wasn't just a military victory, it was a declaration of intent. The capture of Nishapur marked the Seljuks' transition from nomadic warriors to legitimate contenders in the regional power game. It was like they'd gone from playing pickup basketball to joining the NBA overnight. Suddenly, this ragtag group of steppe warriors had a foothold in one of the most culturally sophisticated regions of the medieval world. The fall of Nishapur was more than just a strategic coup. It was a PR masterstroke. The Seljuks cleverly positioned themselves as champions of Sunni Islam, a move that won them the support of the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad. The Caliph, grateful for anyone willing to challenge the Shia Buyids who were holding him in a political headlock, gave the Seljuks his blessing. It was the medieval equivalent of getting a blue tick on Twitter. It legitimized their rule in the eyes of many. But let's not romanticize things too much. Life in the Seljuk Empire was no fairy tale. There was a world where power was as fluid as a jazz solo, and the only constant was change. The Seljuks were masterful at exploiting the political and religious divisions of their time, but they also knew that the same divisions could turn on them in the blink of an eye. Power was a game of chess with live pieces, and the Seljuks needed to stay several moves ahead. To truly understand the Seljuk rise, you have to grasp the socio-political landscape they were navigating. The Middle East of the 10th and 11th centuries was a tapestry of ethnicities and religions, all woven together in a pattern that was as beautiful as it was volatile. Sunni and Shia Muslims, Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, and other groups coexisted, sometimes peacefully, often not. In such a diverse environment, the Seljuks' ability to adapt and adopt was key. They were like historical chameleons, blending into the socio-political fabric while subtly altering its hue. The capture of Nishapur was just the beginning. The Seljuks were like a snowball rolling downhill, picking up momentum and mass as they went. Their next targets were the cities of Merv and Herat, both of which fell into their hands with relative ease. These conquests were not just about acquiring territory. They were about controlling the trade routes and revenue streams that these cities commanded. The Seljuks understood that wealth was the lifeblood of empire, and they were determined to tap into every vein they could find. It's tempting to view the Seljuks as mere conquerors, but that would be selling them short. Their real genius lay in their ability to consolidate and govern the lands they acquired. They wisely retained much of the existing administrative structures in the regions they conquered, a move that minimized disruption and maximized revenue. In many ways, the Seljuks were like corporate raiders who, after a hostile takeover, kept the original management in place because, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The Seljuk rise was also a story of alliances. They knew how to pick their friends, and more importantly, their enemies. By aligning themselves with the Sunni Abbasids, they not only gained religious legitimacy, but also positioned themselves as a bulwark against the Shia powers of the region, particularly the Fatimids in Egypt and the aforementioned Buyids in Iraq. This religious dimension added a layer of complexity to their political maneuvers, but it also gave them a powerful rallying cry that resonated with many of their subjects. So, as the Seljuks settled into their new role as power players in the Middle East, they found themselves at a crossroads. They could either build on their initial successes and cement their place in history, or they could succumb to the same internal divisions and external pressures that had undone so many before them. Spoiler alert. They chose the former, at least for a while, but that's a tale for another time. For now, let's leave the Seljuks basking in their newly acquired glory, a group of once obscure nomads who had carved out an empire in one of the most competitive regions of the medieval world. As the Seljuks basked in their newfound glory, they were about to kick things up a notch under the leadership of Tugrul Beg, a man whose name was destined to be whispered in corridors of power and shouted across battlefields. Picture a chess grandmaster who also happens to be a heavyweight boxer. Tugrul was a strategist who could throw a punch when necessary. Born around 990, he was part of the Seljuk family's second generation of leaders, and he inherited not just a burgeoning empire, but also a political climate that was as volatile as a crate of TNT in a bonfire. Tugrul Beg's rise was meteoric, but not without its fair share of strategic finesse. The Seljuks weren't just about wielding swords and riding horses, though they were pretty good at that too. They were about wielding influence. And influence, my friends, is a currency that never loses its value. Tugrul understood this and played his cards like a seasoned poker player. Let's dive into the pivotal battle of Dandanakan in 1040. If battles had Instagram accounts, this one would have gone viral. Here, the Seljuk forces, numbering around 15,000, faced off against the Ghaznavid army, which was twice their size. To say the odds were against them is like saying the Titanic had a bit of a leak. Yet, Tughril Beg and his brother Chagri Bey turned the tables with a classic hit-and-run tactic that would make a guerrilla warfare instructor nod appreciatively. They harassed the Ghaznavid troops over days, cutting off their supply lines and slowly chipping away at their morale. It was like a medieval version of death by 1,000 cuts, and it worked spectacularly. The victory at Dandanakan was not just a military win. It was a psychological coup de grace. The Seljuks had not only defeated a larger force, but had also demonstrated the strategic prowess that would become their hallmark. For the Ghaznavids, it was like getting checkmated by a pawn. They were forced to retreat, and the Seljuks took control of Khorasan, solidifying their power base. It was a turning point that announced the Seljuks as the new major players in the Islamic world. But Tughril Beg wasn't content with just being a regional power player. Oh no, he had his eyes set on Baghdad. Now, Baghdad in the 11th century was not just a city. It was the heart of the Islamic world, the seat of the Abbasid Caliphate. Imagine New York, London, and Tokyo rolled into one, then sprinkle a little more magic on top. That's Baghdad at its peak. However, by Tughril's time, the city was under the oppressive thumb of the Shia Buyids, much to the chagrin of the Sunni Abbasid Caliph. In a move that would make Machiavelli proud, Tughril Beg positioned himself as the savior of Sunni Islam. He presented his campaign as a holy mission to liberate the Caliph and restore Sunni dominance. It was the ultimate propaganda play, and it worked like a charm. By 1055, Tughril had entered Baghdad, not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. The Caliph welcomed him with open arms, and Tughril was crowned sultan. It was the medieval equivalent of getting a VIP pass to the most exclusive club in town. But let's not kid ourselves. While the romantic image of a liberator was great for the Seljuks' branding, the reality was more complex. Tughril's ascent to power was as much about political savvy as it was about religious zeal. He maintained the existing bureaucracy and made sure the tax revenue kept flowing like a well-oiled machine. After all, it's hard to keep an empire running on ideals alone. You need cold, hard cash to pay the bills and keep the soldiers happy. Tughril Beg's crowning as Sultan of Baghdad was more than just a personal triumph. It was a master class in political chess. He deftly balanced his role as a military leader with the responsibilities of a statesman. By aligning the Seljuks with the Abbasid Caliphate, he not only legitimized their rule, but also created a powerful bloc against the Shia powers of the time, particularly the Fatimids in Egypt. This alliance with the Caliphate was like the medieval version of a strategic partnership, complete with joint ventures and shared interests. The Seljuks also knew how to manipulate the power of alliances. Tughril didn't just rely on his military prowess or his religious legitimacy. He built relationships with local leaders and tribes. He was a master of the carrot and stick approach, offering protection and autonomy to those who pledged loyalty while dealing ruthlessly with those who defied him. It was a delicate balancing act, and Tughril walked the tightrope with the skill of a seasoned acrobat. So, while the legend of Tughril Beg paints him as a heroic figure who single-handedly reshaped the Islamic world, the truth is a bit more nuanced. His success was built on a foundation of shrewd diplomacy, strategic alliances, and yes, a few well-placed battles. Tughril's rise was not just a story of military conquest. It was a testament to the power of strategy, the art of influence, and the importance of knowing when to wield the sword and when to extend the olive branch. As the Seljuks consolidated their power under Tughril Beg, they found themselves poised on the brink of an era that would see them become one of the most influential empires of the medieval world. But let's not put the cart before the horse. The road ahead was fraught with challenges, both internal and external. The Seljuks had proven they could rise to power. Now, they had to prove they could hold on to it. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the Seljuk saga, where power, politics, and a little bit of luck would continue to shape their destiny. As the Seljuk Empire stood on the precipice of greatness, its future was shaped by the leadership of Alp Arslan, a man whose name literally translates to heroic lion. Talk about growing up with expectations. But hey, if you're going to run an empire, you might as well have a name that sounds like a Marvel character. Alp Arslan, the nephew of Tughril Beg, took the reins in 1063, and under his rule, the Seljuks would reach new heights, or at least they'd have a wild ride trying. Alp Arslan's reign was a masterclass in strategy and opportunism, starting with his focus on the Byzantine Empire to the west. Now, the Byzantines were the sort of neighbor that kept you on your toes. They were wealthy, influential, and had a military reputation that was as shiny as their mosaics. For the Seljuks, taking on the Byzantines was like a scrappy startup challenging a tech giant. But Alp Arslan, ever the shrewd tactician, saw an opening. Enter the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, one of those moments in history where you can almost hear the records scratch. The Byzantine Emperor Romanos Roman IV Diogenes decided to lead a massive army, rumored to be as large as 40,000 strong, to confront the Seljuks. But Alp Arslan was a master of the psychological game. He faced this formidable force with only about 20,000 troops, a move that screamed either absolute confidence or mild insanity. The stage was set for a showdown, and on August 26, 1071, the two armies clashed near the town of Manzikert, in what is now eastern Turkey. The battle was a hot mess from the get-go. The Byzantines, burdened by logistical issues and internal dissension, were like a band on tour with no roadies. Alp Arslan, on the other hand, played his cards with the finesse of a Vegas poker champ. He employed a feigned retreat, a tactic that was basically the medieval equivalent of psych, to lure the Byzantines into a trap. The Seljuk cavalry swooped in, and the Byzantine army crumbled faster than a cookie in a toddler's fist. What followed was a seismic shift in the balance of power. Romanos Roman IV was captured, leading to the kind of awkward hostage negotiations that would make even the most seasoned diplomat sweat. Alp Arslan reportedly treated Romanos with respect, even offering him a deal, freedom for a hefty ransom and a promise of non-aggression. Talk about class in victory. The Battle of Manzikert was more than just a military triumph. It was the starting gun for the Turkish advance into Anatolia, a movement that would reshape the region's demographic and cultural landscape. The Seljuks weren't just after land. They were after influence and legacy. The victory at Manzikert allowed them to push deeper into Byzantine territory, a foothold that would eventually pave the way for the rise of the Ottoman Empire centuries later. But let's not get carried away by the romance of conquest. The Seljuks' expansion was not a fairy tale. Behind the glory lay a web of challenges, internal strife, administrative headaches, and the constant juggling act of managing a rapidly growing empire. Alp Arslan was all too aware that the real challenge wasn't winning battles, it was keeping the peace. Alp Arslan's administrative reforms were as crucial as his military exploits. He adopted a pragmatic approach to governance, maintaining much of the existing bureaucratic structure while introducing his own trusted officials. It was a bit like rebranding a company without changing the core product, effective yet subtle. He understood that an empire isn't just about land. It's about people, taxes, and keeping the wheels of economy well greased. Yet, Alp Arslan's reign was not without its hurdles. Internal strife was as much a part of the Seljuk story as their battlefield victories. Power struggles within the Seljuk family were as common as plot twists in a soap opera. Alp Arslan had to navigate these treacherous waters, balancing loyalty with authority, all while keeping an eye on external threats. It was a high-wire act that required nerves of steel and a knack for diplomacy. In 1072, just a year after Manzikert, Alp Arslan met his end in a rather unexpected manner. During a campaign in the eastern frontier, he was captured and fatally wounded by Yusuf al-Khwarizmi, a disgruntled minor noble. It was a stark reminder that even the mightiest lion can fall prey to a stray arrow, or, in this case, a dagger. Alp Arslan's death was a blow to the Seljuk Empire, but it also set the stage for the rise of his son, Malik Shah, whose reign would further cement the Seljuks' legacy. Malik Shah took the throne in 1072, inheriting an empire that was both mighty and precarious. His rule, lasting until 1092, is often viewed through rose-tinted glasses, but let's peel back the romantic veneer. Malik Shah was a visionary, but he was also a leader who faced constant challenges, both from within and outside his realm. His reign was marked by administrative reforms that sought to streamline governance and improve efficiency. He relied on the formidable skills of his vizier, Nizam al-Mulk, whose treatise, Siyaset-Nama, became the go-to manual for running a medieval empire. Think of it as the how to win friends and influence people of the 11th century. But the challenges were real. Malik Shah's empire was a tapestry of diverse cultures and religions, a melting pot that needed careful tending. His administrative reforms aimed to create a sense of unity amidst this diversity, but it was a delicate balancing act. The Seljuks had to maintain the loyalty of their subjects while staving off external threats, including the ever-looming Fatimids and the restless Crusaders who were just beginning to stir. Malik Shah's reign saw the Seljuk Empire reach its territorial zenith, stretching from the Mediterranean to the gates of India. It was an empire of immense wealth and influence, a testament to the Seljuks' ability to adapt and thrive. But it was also an empire built on a foundation of shifting sands. Internal divisions, succession disputes, and the constant pressure to maintain control were ever-present challenges that kept Malik Shah on his toes. As we look back at this period, it's tempting to get swept up in the grandeur of the Seljuk Empire. But it's important to remember that behind the idyllic portraits of wise sultans and victorious battles lay a reality that was complex, often brutal, and always uncertain. The Seljuks were masterful in their rise to power, but they were also acutely aware of the fragility of their empire, a fragility that would eventually test the limits of their resolve. So, as we delve further into the saga of the Seljuk Empire, keep in mind that history is rarely as simple as it seems. The Seljuks were not just conquerors. They were statesmen, strategists, and survivors in a world where the only constant was change. And as the tale unfolds, with Malik Shah and his successors navigating the choppy waters of medieval politics, we'll continue to explore the highs and lows of an empire that left an indelible mark on history, even as the sands of time threaten to sweep it away. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. As we continue tracing the Seljuk Empire's journey, let's shift gears from the battlefield to the bustling bazaars and sprawling academies that underpinned their realm. If the Seljuks were the rock stars of the medieval world, then trade routes were their tour buses, carrying culture, commerce, and a little chaos across continents. Picture the Silk Road, that legendary highway of commerce that stretched over 4,000 miles from China to the Mediterranean, acting as the empire's economic backbone. It's easy to romanticize the Silk Road as some kind of ancient autobahn, but the reality was more of a dusty, perilous trek than a smooth cruise. Caravans braved treacherous terrain, bandits with entrepreneurial spirits, and the occasional tax collector in a bad mood. Yet these routes were vital arteries, pumping life into the Seljuk economy. The Seljuks, ever the savvy operators, controlled key segments of this network. They were like the toll booth operators of the medieval world, ensuring a steady stream of revenue from merchants transporting silk, spices, and everything in between. Speaking of revenue, let's talk taxes. The Seljuks knew that while swords won battles, coins won empires. They implemented a tax system that was, shall we say, thorough. If you could breathe and own property, you were likely paying taxes. The Carthage, a land tax, was the crown jewel of their fiscal strategy. It was like the IRS, only with more camels and fewer audits. This tax was a flat rate on agricultural produce, ensuring the empire's coffers were well lined. It was a delicate dance of squeezing just enough from the populace without sparking a full-blown riot. But it wasn't all about the Benjamins, or whatever medieval currency floated their boat. The Seljuks also invested in infrastructure, building caravanserais like medieval motels, offering weary travelers a place to rest, and more importantly, spend their hard-earned cash. These were the original roadside pit stops, complete with food, lodging, and a side of cultural exchange. Now, what about the cultural renaissance that the Seljuks helped ignite? Picture a world where science and culture flourished amid the chaos of empire building. The Seljuk period saw an Islamic golden age, a time of intellectual and cultural flowering that would make any Renaissance artist blush. The Seljuks were patrons of the arts and sciences, contributing to a cultural revival that spanned from poetry to philosophy. The Nizamiya, medieval universities funded by the Seljuk vizier Nizam al-Mulk, were the Ivy Leagues of their day. These institutions attracted scholars from across the Islamic world, eager to dive into subjects ranging from theology to astronomy. It's like Hogwarts, but with more algebra and fewer magic wands. This environment of learning and inquiry helped make the Seljuk Empire a crucible of knowledge, where ideas were exchanged as freely as goods on the Silk Road. Among their scholarly achievements was the work of Omar Khayyam, a mathematician and astronomer who dabbled in poetry on the side. His contributions to algebra were as groundbreaking as his verses were enchanting. Khayyam's Rubaiyat, a collection of quatrains, explored themes of fate and existence that resonated through the ages. It's a bit like finding out your favorite rock star also has a PhD in quantum physics. But let's not get too swept up in the romance of intellectual pursuits. Running an empire meant balancing the books as much as the books of wisdom. Military expenses were a constant drain on resources. The Seljuks maintained a standing army to defend their vast territories, and while this sounds impressive, it was also a logistical nightmare. Soldiers needed food, equipment, and the occasional paycheck. It was like running a medieval startup where the board members were armed and outnumbered. The expense of maintaining such a force was substantial. It's estimated that military costs could consume up to half of the empire's revenue. This meant that even with a steady stream of taxes and trade income, the Seljuks had to be shrewd financial managers. Imagine trying to balance a budget where your biggest line item is defense against disgruntled neighbors and random invaders. In this period, the Seljuks also faced the mundane, yet crucial realities of governance. Administering an empire that stretched from modern-day Turkey to Iran was no small feat. Communication was slow, relying on couriers who traveled at the speed of, well, a horse. Laws had to be enforced, justice administered, and dissent squashed with a firm but fair hand. Local governors wielded significant power, acting as both administrators and enforcers. It was a decentralized system that required constant oversight and the occasional iron fist. So, as the Seljuk Empire navigated the complexities of trade, taxation, and culture, it was clear that their success was built on more than just military might. They were architects of a world that valued knowledge as much as conquest, a world where the exchange of ideas was as vital as the exchange of goods. Yet, as with any empire, the challenges of governance and economic management were ever present, reminding the Seljuks that power was as much about pragmatism as it was about prestige. In the grand tapestry of history, the Seljuks were more than just conquerors. They were cultural curators, economic engineers, and shrewd statesmen. Their legacy is one of complexity, reminder that empires are built not just on the battlefield, but in the hearts and minds of those they govern. As we continue this journey, remember that the story of the Seljuks is a tale of ambition tempered by reality, a saga of power and principle that still echoes through the ages. But hold your horses, because this tale of the Seljuk Empire, with all its grandeur and grit, is about to hit the rocky shores of decline. Picture the empire as a band that shot to fame too quickly, with all the trappings of success, but none of the stability to back it up. The Seljuks were now facing the classic problem of overexpansion, a logistical nightmare that would make even the most seasoned roadie sweat. Managing a sprawling empire from the Mediterranean all the way to Central Asia was like trying to juggle flaming torches while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. It was exhilarating, sure, but also a little bit insane. By the late 11th century, the Seljuk Empire was a patchwork quilt of territories, each with its own local leaders, customs, and occasional rebellious streaks. It was like a medieval version of a reality TV show where every episode brought a new drama. The empire had been built on alliances and promises, but as the saying goes, promises are like pie crusts, made to be broken. Local governors, or adebegs, began to exercise more autonomy, and the central authority found itself about as powerful as a substitute teacher in a room full of sugar-high toddlers. A key player in this unfolding drama was the death of Malik Shah in 1092. His demise was like the sudden exit of a lead singer, leaving the band scrambling to figure out who would take center stage. The result was an empire splintering into factions, each led by a contender with dreams of power, but none of the charisma or clout to keep the groupies, provinces, united. The Seljuk family played out their own version of Game of Thrones, with brothers, uncles, and cousins all vying for a piece of the imperial pie. These internal conflicts turned what was once a formidable empire into a hotbed of chaos. Meanwhile, external pressures were mounting. The Crusades were heating up, with European knights and their entourage of heavy armor and dubious hygiene, descending on the Holy Land like it was the medieval version of Coachella. The First Crusade kicked off in 1096, and it was a brutal reminder that the Seljuks weren't the only players on the board. The Crusaders captured Jerusalem in 1099, a move that sent shockwaves through the Islamic world and exposed the vulnerabilities of the Seljuk state. Then there was the pesky problem of the Fatimids and other regional powers itching to take a bite out of the Seljuk territories. The empire, once a monolith, was now more like a crumbling statue, with pieces falling off faster than you could say political instability. The Seljuks were fighting a war on multiple fronts, both internal and external, and it was only a matter of time before the cracks turned into chasms. Economically, the empire was feeling the pinch. The once bustling trade routes were now plagued by insecurity, as bandits and rival factions turned the highways of commerce into gauntlets of danger. The tax systems, once the empire's financial backbone, were now as reliable as a weather forecast. As revenues dwindled, the empire struggled to maintain its military and administrative apparatus, a bit like trying to keep a luxury yacht afloat with duct tape and wishful thinking. But let's not throw the Seljuks entirely under the bus. Despite their political and military woes, the legacy they left behind is nothing short of remarkable. The architectural marvels from their era still stand as testaments to their influence. Take the Great Mosque of Isfahan, an UNESCO World Heritage Site that's a masterclass in Islamic architecture. Its intricate tilework and expansive courtyard are the kind of things that make art historians swoon and Instagrammers reach for their cameras. The Seljuks also left a cultural footprint that reverberates through time. Their patronage of the arts and sciences was like a medieval Kickstarter campaign that funded some of the greatest minds of the era. From astronomy to literature, the Seljuks helped ignite a cultural renaissance that spread far beyond their borders. Their support of scholars like Omar Khayyam and the establishment of institutions like the Nizamiya madrasas created a legacy of intellectual pursuit that still inspires awe. And then there's the romanticized view of the Seljuks as gallant warriors and enlightened rulers, an image that persists in modern perceptions. It's the stuff of legends, the kind of tales that make for great bedtime stories, with dashing sultans and epic battles. But beneath the romantic veneer lies a more complex reality, one of political machinations, economic challenges, and the unrelenting march of time that spares no empire. As we wrap up this saga of the Seljuk Empire, let's remember that their story is a microcosm of the human experience. It's a tale of ambition and overreach, of visionaries and opportunists, of cultural achievements and political pitfalls. The Seljuks remind us that empires, much like rock bands and reality shows, are ultimately about the people who run them, their dreams, their flaws, and their legacies. So next time you find yourself gazing at the magnificence of a Seljuk monument or reading the poetic musings of Khayyam, remember the grit and grind that went into creating such wonders. History is rarely as neat as the stories we tell, but it's these very complexities that make it all the more fascinating. The Seljuks may have faded into history's tapestry, but their legacy continues to weave its way into our understanding of the past, an enduring reminder that even the mightiest empires are built on the shifting sands of time. On a crisp spring day in 1856, the town of Freiburg, nestled like a quaint dart in the Austrian Empire's vast expanse, was about to witness the arrival of a baby who'd eventually shake the very foundations of how we think about thinking. Yes, we're talking about Sigmund Freud, the guy who'd one day convinced the world that dreams were more than just a nightly misadventure. Freud was born on May 6th to Jakob and Amalia, his parents. It's worth noting that his mother was not only 20 years younger than his father, but also his father's third wife. Talk about complicated family dynamics right from the get-go. From an early age, Freud was a bit of a wonderkind. By the time he hit 5, he was already dabbling in multiple languages, like a linguistic prodigy. This wasn't just some parlor trick to impress his relatives at family gatherings. It was a sign of the intellectual curiosity that would define him. Languages were just the warm-up act for a mind that would soon dive into the murky waters of the unconscious. Fast forward to 1873, when Freud, a fresh-faced 17-year-old, waltzed into the University of Vienna. Now, for all you folks who think he immediately launched into analyzing dreams and cigars, not so fast. Before he became the patron saint of psychoanalysis, Freud had to endure the academic hazing that comes with being a medical student. In fact, his early university years were anything but straightforward. He took his sweet time, lingering in academia for a solid 8 years before graduating in 1881. You know, just the normal pace for someone destined to revolutionize the understanding of the human psyche. Now, let's talk about the eels. Yes, eels. Before delving into the intricacies of the human mind, Freud had a less than glamorous start in the world of scientific research. Picture him, a young and ambitious scientist, painstakingly dissecting hundreds of eels in search of their elusive reproductive organs. Spoiler alert, he didn't find them. It turns out, those slippery creatures were as enigmatic as the human mind he'd later explore. But hey, at least the eels didn't have mommy issues. As if the eels weren't enough, Freud's early career took another curious turn when he became an advocate for the wonders of cocaine. Yes, you heard that right. In the late 19th century, cocaine wasn't just a drug. It was a miracle cure-all, a Victorian-era Red Bull, if you will. Freud wrote enthusiastic papers about its potential benefits and even sent some to his fiancée, Martha Bernays, because nothing says romance like a little narcotic pick-me-up. But hey, let's cut him some slack. This was a time when cocaine was as legal and socially acceptable as a cup of coffee. Besides, this little detour into pharmacology wasn't a complete waste. It was laying the groundwork for his later interest in psychoactive substances and their effects on the mind. Freud's fascination with languages wasn't just an academic pursuit. It was a survival skill. Growing up in a multicultural area meant that it was practically a necessity to speak multiple tongues. The guy knew his German and French, sure, but he was also dabbling in English, Italian, Spanish, and Hebrew. By the time he was done, his brain was like an international airport of languages, each serving as a runway for his thoughts. But back to the University of Vienna. This was a place teeming with intellectual giants, and Freud was just another student trying to find his footing. He wasn't exactly a star pupil at first. In fact, his university days were a bit like a melodramatic sitcom. Picture Freud, a young man with a penchant for cigars and a head full of ideas, navigating the maze of medical courses with all the grace of a penguin on roller skates. Yet, despite his initial academic floundering, Freud was slowly building the foundations of his future theories. It was here that he began to explore the mysteries of the human nervous system, albeit without the fanfare that would later accompany his work. And while his eel research might not have yielded the breakthrough he was hoping for, it was a testament to his willingness to dive into the unknown, no matter how slimy or slippery it might be. Freud's early life wasn't just a series of academic pursuits and scientific misadventures, though. It was also a time of personal growth and development. His relationship with Martha Bernays, for instance, was a cornerstone of his life. They exchanged hundreds of letters, filled with everything from mundane daily updates to profound philosophical musings. In many ways, their correspondence was a precursor to the psychoanalytic sessions he'd later conduct. It was a testament to his belief in the power of communication, a belief that would become central to his later work. By the time Freud finally graduated, the world was on the cusp of change. The late 19th century was a period of scientific discovery and technological advancement, and Freud was determined to be at the forefront. While his early career might have been marked by eels and cocaine, these experiences were crucial stepping stones on his path to becoming the father of psychoanalysis. They taught him the value of perseverance, the importance of questioning established norms, and the power of the human mind, a trifecta that would define his work for years to come. In the grand tapestry of history, Freud's early life might seem like just a series of quirky anecdotes and scientific missteps, but in reality, it was the crucible in which his future ideas were forged. It was a time of exploration and experimentation, of triumphs and failures, of dreams and ambitions. And while the world might not have realized it at the time, the young man dissecting eels and advocating for cocaine was on the brink of changing how we see ourselves and the world around us. And just like that, Freud found himself on the brink of something big, something that would make his eel dissections seem as quaint as a game of marbles. Into the late 1880, a time when Freud swapped his lab coat for a metaphorical therapist's couch. This was his eureka moment, a turning point where he began to develop psychoanalysis, a field that would soon become as synonymous with his name as apple pie is to America. But let's pump the brakes for a second and talk about the talking cure, which was less of a cure and more of a bold experiment in verbal excavation. The Viennese intellectual scene was a cauldron of innovation and skepticism, and Freud was about to add his special ingredient. Influenced by his mentor Joseph Breuer, Freud dove headfirst into the world of hysteria, a condition that seemed to afflict more women than men, though it's anyone's guess why. Maybe it had something to do with the fact that women were still living under the shadow of corsets and social constraints. Breuer's work with a patient named Anna O. was pivotal. By letting Anna talk about her symptoms, Breuer stumbled upon a peculiar phenomenon. Her symptoms improved. It was like discovering that a good chat could be as effective as a medical procedure. Freud dubbed this the talking cure, and it quickly became the cornerstone of his new approach. Now, you might be wondering how this was received in Vienna, a city that was equal parts refinement and rigidity. Well, let's just say Freud's ideas were met with the enthusiasm usually reserved for a dentist's drill. His theories initially landed like a lead balloon, with many of his peers dismissing them as little more than quackery. Imagine trying to sell a newfangled gadget that promises to revolutionize household chores, only for everyone to look at you like you've lost your marbles. That was Freud's reality. But Freud was nothing if not persistent. He was like a dog with a bone, determined to prove that the mind was a battlefield of hidden conflicts and repressed memories. In 1895, he co-authored Studies on Hysteria with Breuer, a book that laid the groundwork for psychoanalysis. It was a collection of case studies, each one more bizarre than the last, like a Victorian-era anthology of psychological thrillers. The book didn't exactly fly off the shelves, but it did catch the attention of a few curious minds. And then there were the dreams. Ah, dreams, a subject as slippery as the eels Freud once dissected. In 1900, Freud published The Interpretation of Dreams, a tome that would cement his reputation as the dream weaver of the unconscious. Freud argued that dreams were the royal road to the unconscious, a place where our deepest desires and fears played out like a never-ending soap opera. He believed that analyzing dreams could reveal hidden truths about our psyche. It was a bold claim, and one that led to many a raised eyebrow. After all, dreams had long been seen as little more than the brain's way of playing dress-up in the dark. Freud's fascination with dreams was partly personal. He spent countless hours analyzing his own dreams, convinced that they held the key to understanding his own mind. It was a bit like being a detective in his own mental mystery, piecing together clues and chasing down leads. He developed a whole lexicon to explain his findings, introducing terms like manifest content and latent content. These terms were like passwords to a secret club, one where only the initiated could truly appreciate the complexities of the mind. But let's not sugarcoat it. Freud's theories were, and still are, controversial. Some saw them as groundbreaking, while others dismissed them as pseudoscience. Even today, the idea that dreams are windows to the unconscious is hotly debated, but there's no denying the allure of Freud's theories. They offered a tantalizing glimpse into a world where the mundane and the mysterious coexisted, where dreams could be decoded like cryptic messages from the subconscious. Freud's work on dreams was part of a larger tapestry of ideas that he was weaving. He introduced concepts like the ID, ego, and superego, elements of the psyche that were locked in a perpetual battle for control. It was like a psychological Game of Thrones, with each part vying for dominance. These ideas were revolutionary, challenging the notion that the mind was a rational, orderly place. Instead, Freud painted a picture of the mind as a chaotic battleground, where desires and fears clashed in a never-ending struggle. But let's not forget the economic context of Freud's work. Vienna at the turn of the century was a city of stark contrasts, where opulence and poverty lived side by side. The city was a hub of cultural and intellectual activity, but it was also a place where the pressure to conform was immense. Freud's theories offered a form of liberation, a way to break free from the constraints of society and explore the depths of the self. It was a radical idea, one that resonated with those who felt trapped by the rigid norms of the time. And so, Freud continued to push the boundaries of psychology, even as he faced criticism and skepticism. His ideas were like seeds, slowly taking root and growing into a new field of study. Psychoanalysis was born, and it would go on to influence everything from literature to art to film. But that's a story for another day. For now, let's leave Freud in Vienna, a city on the cusp of change, and a man on the brink of revolutionizing how we think about the mind. And so, as the 20th century rolled in like a freight train, Sigmund Freud found himself at the helm of a burgeoning psychological revolution. It's one thing to have a few quirky theories about the mind, but it's another to become a household name. Yet, that's exactly what Freud did. The publication of The Interpretation of Dreams in 1900 was just the starting pistol in a race that would see him sprint from obscurity to infamy faster than you can say Oedipus complex. Now, let's not pretend that Freud was some lone genius, scribbling away in a dimly lit Viennese garret. The reality was far more collaborative and a tad messier. Freud was part of a network of intellectuals, a veritable Avengers team of early psychoanalysts, if you will. Among them was Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist with a penchant for mystical symbolism and a talent for turning the tables on Freud's ideas. Together, they were like a psychological Batman and Robin, with more than their fair share of drama. The dynamic duo met in 1907, and it was like a match made in analytical heaven. Freud, the elder statesman of psychoanalysis, saw in Jung the potential to spread his theories beyond the borders of Austria. Jung, for his part, was drawn to Freud's charisma and groundbreaking ideas. Their correspondence was prolific, filled with mutual admiration and a shared vision for the future of psychology. But as with any good partnership, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Here's the thing about geniuses: they don't always play well with others. Freud and Jung's relationship was a cocktail of camaraderie, competition, and eventual conflict. The crux of their disagreement, the scope of psychoanalysis. Freud was adamant that sex was the primary driver of human behavior, while Jung was less convinced, favoring a broader exploration of the psyche that included spirituality and myth. This wasn't just a philosophical spat. It was a battle for the soul of psychoanalysis. By 1912, the cracks had turned into chasms. Jung published Psychology of the Unconscious, a work that challenged Freud's emphasis on sexual motivations and ventured into the realm of archetypes and the collective unconscious. Freud's reaction was less than enthusiastic, to say the least. Their friendship, once described as a father-son relationship, dissolved faster than sugar in hot tea. By 1914, the split was official, and the psychoanalytic world was left to pick up the pieces. The Freud-Jung breakup is often romanticized as a tragic tale of two intellectual titans who couldn't see eye to eye. But let's not kid ourselves. Their clash was as much about ego as it was about ideology. Freud was a man who liked to be right, and he wasn't about to let anyone, not even a protege like Jung, challenge his authority. In the end, Freud's insistence on orthodoxy and Jung's desire for innovation were as incompatible as oil and water. Meanwhile, back in Vienna, Freud's fame was skyrocketing. His lectures were standing-room-only affairs, drawing curious minds eager to learn from the master himself. The psychoanalytic movement was gaining momentum, with Freud at its helm, steering the ship through the turbulent waters of early 20th century psychology. His theories were polarizing, sure, but they were also captivating, offering a tantalizing glimpse into the previously uncharted territory of the unconscious mind. Freud's network wasn't limited to Jung, of course. He had a cadre of followers, often referred to as the Freud Circle, who were instrumental in spreading his ideas. Names like Alfred Adler and Wilhelm Steckel were part of this group, though, like Jung, they too would eventually part ways with Freud. It seems that while Freud was excellent at attracting talent, he was equally adept at alienating it. His circle was a revolving door of intellectual heavyweights, each leaving their mark on the burgeoning field of psychoanalysis before moving on to carve their own paths. It's easy to buy into the myth of Freud as a solitary genius, but the truth is far more nuanced. He was a man of his time, navigating the intricate social and intellectual landscapes of Vienna with all the finesse of a political tactician. His work was as much a product of collaboration as it was of individual brilliance, shaped by the vibrant debates and discussions that characterized his interactions with colleagues. Economically, Freud's rise coincided with a period of significant change in Vienna. The city was booming, a melting pot of cultures and ideas, but it was also a place where the gap between rich and poor was more pronounced than ever. Freud's theories, with their focus on the inner workings of the mind, offered a kind of psychological liberation, a way for individuals to break free from the constraints of their socio-economic conditions and explore their personal identities. This wasn't just about self-indulgence, though. Freud was keenly aware of the societal pressures that shaped individual behavior. His work wasn't just an exploration of the self. It was a commentary on the human condition, a deep dive into the complexities of desire, repression, and conflict. In a world where appearances were everything, Freud dared to ask what lay beneath the surface, a question that resonated with those seeking answers beyond the superficial. In the midst of all this, Freud's personal life was just as complex as his professional one. His marriage to Martha Bernays was a cornerstone of his existence, yet it wasn't without its challenges. Freud was a man devoted to his work, often to the detriment of his family life. His letters to Martha reveal a man torn between the demands of his career and the desire for personal fulfillment. It's a familiar story, one that echoes through the ages, as relevant today as it was over a century ago. As Freud's reputation grew, so did the demand for his insights. His books were translated into multiple languages. His lectures were attended by eager students and skeptics alike, and his theories were debated in academic circles around the globe. Freud was becoming not just a figure in psychology, but a cultural icon, his name synonymous with the exploration of the human mind. But let's not sugarcoat it. Freud's path to fame was fraught with challenges. His ideas were often met with skepticism and ridicule, dismissed by some as little more than pseudo-scientific ramblings. Yet, Freud persevered, fueled by an unwavering belief in the validity of his work. He was a man on a mission, determined to prove that the mind was as complex and fascinating as any scientific puzzle. So, as we leave Freud at the height of his powers, it's clear that his story is far from over. The seeds of psychoanalysis had been planted, but the field was still in its infancy. There were battles yet to be fought, ideas yet to be explored, and controversies yet to be stirred. Freud's journey was just beginning, and the world of psychology would never be the same again. Stay tuned, because the saga of Sigmund Freud is one roller coaster ride you won't want to miss. As Freud stood at the pinnacle of his career, the ripples of his theories began to cascade outwards, touching everything from the gilded halls of art galleries to the bustling boardrooms of Madison Avenue. Freud's ideas about the unconscious and the tangled web of desires, fears, fantasies found a receptive audience in artists who were, quite frankly, tired of the same old landscapes and still lifes. Enter surrealism, which took Freud's dream theories and ran with them, like a child sprinting away with a stolen cookie. Surrealism, with its kaleidoscopic landscapes and dreamlike imagery, became the artistic embodiment of Freudian thought. Salvador Dali, one of the movement's poster children, adored Freud's ideas like a cat loves a sunbeam. Dali's melting clerks and distorted figures were more than just bizarre visuals. They were a canvas manifestation of the unconscious mind, a place where time, space, and reality decided to take a coffee break. Dali even traveled to London in 1938 to meet Freud, hoping to get the shrink's seal of approval on his work. Freud, in his characteristically stoic manner, reportedly told a friend that Dali's face was the perfect example of a Spanish fanatic. Not quite a glowing endorsement, but hey, it was something. Now, art wasn't the only realm where Freud's influence was felt. The advertising industry, with its singular aim of making people part with their hard-earned cash, saw potential in Freud's theories. If the unconscious could be tapped into, then surely it could be manipulated to sell products right. Enter Edward Bernays, Freud's nephew, who took his uncle's lessons and used them to revolutionize public relations and advertising. Bernays, often called the father of PR, believed that by understanding the hidden desires of consumers, businesses could shape their wants and needs like clay in a sculptor's hands. His campaigns, like the one that convinced women that smoking Lucky Strikes was an act of feminist rebellion, were nothing short of psychological sleight of hand. But let's not sugarcoat it. While Freud's ideas were spreading like wildfire, they weren't always embraced with open arms. In the United States, The land of opportunity and skepticism, Freudian psychoanalysis was often met with the enthusiasm usually reserved for root canal procedures. The American psychological community, led by figures like John B. Watson, was more interested in behaviorism, a school of thought that viewed the mind as a black box best left unopened. Freud, with his introspective focus, seemed a bit like a philosopher in a lab coat, more interested in the why than the how. Yet, despite the pushback, Freud's theories seeped into popular culture like ink on a blotter. Movies, which were quickly becoming the dominant art form of the 20th century, embraced psychoanalytic themes with relish. Alfred Hitchcock, the master of suspense, was particularly fond of using Freudian concepts to add layers to his films. In Spellbound, 1945, he even brought in Salvador Dali to design a dream sequence, ensuring that Freud was present in spirit if not in person. The film's exploration of repressed memories and the subconscious was textbook Freud, wrapped in a thriller package that audiences couldn't resist. On the academic front, Freud wasn't a one-man band. He had a cast of supporting characters, fellow thinkers who helped refine and diversify his ideas. Figures like Anna Freud, his daughter, took up the mantle and expanded psychoanalysis into child development. Anna's work in the field was groundbreaking, introducing concepts like defense mechanisms, which are now as familiar to psychology students as the periodic table is to chemists. Meanwhile, Melanie Klein, another psychoanalytic heavyweight, took Freud's ideas and applied them to children, arguing that even the tiniest humans had complex inner lives. Yet the Freud myth, that of the lone genius, is a narrative in need of serious debunking. Psychoanalysis was not birthed in a vacuum, nor was it the product of a single mind. Freud was the figurehead, sure, but he stood on the shoulders of giants, colleagues who challenged, refined, and sometimes outright rebelled against his theories. The world of early 20th century psychology was a cauldron of ideas, with Freud's theories bubbling alongside those of Jung, Adler, and countless others. The economic backdrop of Freud's rise is equally crucial to understanding his impact. Vienna, a city of opulent facades and backstreet poverty, was teetering on the brink of modernity and chaos. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was a melting pot of nationalities, beliefs, and classes, each vying for a piece of the pie as the world edged closer to the First World War. In this environment, Freud's ideas offered an escape, a way to understand and perhaps control the chaos within and without. As Europe plunged into the hellscape of war, the relevance of Freud's work took on a new dimension. The battlefield of the mind became a reflection of the literal battlefields scarring the continent. Soldiers returned from the front with shell shock, a condition that baffled medical professionals of the time. Freud's theories on trauma and repressed memories provided a framework for understanding these psychological wounds, offering a glimmer of hope in a world gone mad. In this context, we must acknowledge that Freud's theories didn't just pop into existence fully formed. They were shaped by the social, political, and economic climates of their time. Freud was very much a product of his environment, a thinker whose work was inextricably linked to the world around him. His theories were both a reaction to and a reflection of the tumultuous era in which he lived. Yet, the myth of Freud as the sole architect of modern psychology persists, a testament to the allure of the lone genius narrative. The reality is far more intricate. Freud was a catalyst, a central figure in a broader movement that sought to unlock the mysteries of the human mind. His legacy is a tapestry woven from the threads of many thinkers, each contributing their own unique patterns to the fabric of psychoanalysis. As we move forward in this exploration of Freud's impact, it's clear that his story is not one of solitary brilliance, but of collaboration and conflict, innovation and adaptation. The stage is set for a deeper dive into how Freud's theories continue to evolve and influence, leaving an indelible mark on the 20th century and beyond. But that, dear friends, is a tale for another time. As we navigate the final chapter of Sigmund Freud's extraordinary life, we find ourselves in the twilight of the interwar years, a period when Europe was a cauldron of political upheaval and existential dread. By the late 1930s, Freud, the godfather of psychoanalysis, was about as welcome in Nazi-occupied Vienna as an ice cube in the desert. With the Anschluss in 1938, when Austria found itself annexed into Hitler's Third Reich. Freud's Jewish heritage painted a target on his back that even his formidable intellect couldn't deflect. The political climate was as frigid as a Viennese winter, and Freud's situation was dire. His escape from Vienna was less a grand escape and more a desperate scramble. Think of it as Indiana Jones meets Kafka. In a move as audacious as any thriller plot, the Freud family managed to secure exit visas, thanks in part to an international outcry and a hefty ransom. We're talking about 800 Reichsmarks, roughly the equivalent of $18,000 today, which isn't exactly pocket change. Freud's reputation and connections turned out to be as valuable as the gold bars that lined the coffers of his oppressors. So, in June 1938, Freud, aged 82 and battling cancer, bid Vienna a bittersweet adieu. He was whisked away to London, a city that was about to become his final stage. It's a poignant image. The elderly Freud, with his imposing eyebrows and ever-present cigar, setting foot in a land that was both a refuge and a final chapter. London wasn't just any city. It was where Freud would continue to work, albeit at a slower pace, until his death a year later on September 23, 1939. His passing, just as World War II erupted, felt like the closing of one tumultuous era and the dawn of another. Freud's death wasn't just the end of a life. It was the moment his legacy began to fossilize, creating a monument that was both revered and reviled. His theories, once the intellectual equivalent of a Molotov cocktail, continued to ignite debates around the world. While Freud was undeniably a titan of psychology, not everyone was buying what he was selling. His concepts of the ID, ego, and superego were as polarizing as they were popular. Critics accused him of having a fixation, pun intended, on sexuality, arguing that his theories were more conjecture than science. But let's not throw the Freudian baby out with the bathwater. Despite the controversies, his influence was, and still is, unmistakable. Freud laid the psychological groundwork for understanding the vast, complex tapestry of human emotion. He was the first to suggest that our minds are like icebergs, with the conscious mind merely the tip and the unconscious mind lurking beneath the murky depths. This idea, that we are not fully in control of our thoughts and actions, was both revolutionary and terrifying. The shadow of Freud's legacy looms large over the 20th century and beyond. His theories inspired countless successors and spawned a myriad of schools of thought. Carl Jung went on to explore the collective unconscious, while others like Alfred Adler focused on individual psychology, emphasizing social influences over instinctual drives. Even today, Freud's theories are as likely to appear in a college syllabus as they are to be dissected in a late-night dorm room debate. The man had a knack for creating concepts that were as enduring as they were contentious. Freud's influence spread beyond the realm of academia and into the bloodstream of popular culture. Hollywood, ever the opportunist, embraced Freudian themes with open arms. Films like Vertigo and Psycho aren't just psychological thrillers, they're practically Freudian case studies in celluloid form. The notion of the repressed self, the Oedipus complex, and the idea of dreams as wish fulfillments have become staples of cinematic storytelling. Yet, Freud's image has been shaped not only by his ardent admirers, but also by his sharpest critics. The backlash against Freud wasn't just academic, it was personal. Some accused him of intellectual arrogance, an unwillingness to accept criticism or deviation from his theories. Others took issue with his methodological approach, arguing that his case studies were cherry-picked to fit his hypotheses. His critics were like a Greek chorus, casting doubt on the veracity of his claims while acknowledging the undeniable drama of his narrative. The economic backdrop of Freud's legacy is equally telling. As the world hurtled through the Great Depression and into the war years, the allure of psychoanalysis offered a form of introspective escapism. Freud's ideas provided a framework for understanding not just individual neuroses, but the collective anxieties of a world in turmoil. The 20th century, with its rapid technological advancements and social upheavals, was fertile ground for Freudian thought. People were looking for answers, and Freud, with his probing insights into the human psyche, offered a tantalizing glimpse into the abyss of the self. But let's be clear, Freud wasn't a prophet, nor was he infallible. His theories were, at times, more art than science, more interpretive dance than empirical evidence. Yet it's precisely this blend of creativity and conjecture that has allowed his ideas to endure. Freud dared to ask the uncomfortable questions, to probe the hidden recesses of the human mind. In doing so, he opened the door to a new understanding of what it means to be human. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Freud's life and legacy, let's leave behind the notion of Freud as an inscrutable intellectual giant. Instead, see him for what he was, a man who, through his relentless curiosity and audacious theories, changed the way we see ourselves and each other. Freud's legacy is a testament to the power of ideas, a reminder that even the most controversial concepts can ignite a revolution in thought. Love him or loathe him, one thing is certain: the world of psychology, and indeed the world itself, wouldn't be the same without Sigmund Freud. The Byzantine Empire, where the past is as glittering as the mosaics in Hagia Sophia and as tangled as a bowl of spaghetti. In this world of emperors and intrigue, women played roles that were as complex as they were critical. Now, if you think the Byzantine Empire was just a fancy sequel to the Roman Empire, buckle up. The Byzantines were the Romans on a Byzantine budget, with a touch of Eastern spice and a whole lot of drama. Let's dive into the Byzantine societal structure, where everything was a hierarchy within a hierarchy. You had your emperor at the top, surrounded by a court that could rival any soap opera ensemble. Below them, the usual suspects: aristocrats, merchants, soldiers, and drumroll women. Yes, women were there too, often invisible in the grand tapestry, but no less essential. The Byzantine Empire was like a giant, elaborate chess game, and women were not just pawns. With their influence woven through daily life, they could be queens, bishops, knights, or even the hand moving the pieces. Now, about the Byzantine legal framework. Enter the Justinian Code, the legal system that was meant to be the ultimate rulebook. Think of it as the Byzantine Empire's answer to how to run an empire for dummies. It was compiled under Emperor Justinian, in the 6th century, a time when this guy was not just trying to keep the lights on in Constantinople, but also wanted to reclaim the glory of the Roman Empire. The code was a comprehensive collection of laws, and surprise, it wasn't entirely friendly to women. Sure, it gave them some rights, like owning property and initiating divorce, but it was no feminist manifesto. Women were still largely seen as needing male guardianship, and their primary roles were wrapped in domesticity. But wait, there's more. The Justinian Code wasn't just about keeping women in the kitchen. It also allowed them to be involved in business to some extent, manage wealth, and inherit property. So, while they weren't exactly breaking glass ceilings, they could at least poke a hole or two through the plaster. In the Byzantine economy, which was as complex and diverse as the empire itself, women could be found running family businesses, particularly in the textile industry. The empire needed silk, and ladies were there to make sure everyone wasn't running around in their birthday suits. Speaking of powerful women, let's talk about Empress Theodora, who was as formidable as she was fascinating. Picture this: a woman who rose from the world of the stage, where her performances were likely a bit more risque than a Midsummer Night's Dream, to the very throne of the empire. Theodora was the wife of Emperor Justinian I, but she wasn't just arm candy. Oh no, she was a political powerhouse. She had a say in everything from religious policies to social reforms. She was like the original House of Cards character, minus the fictional part. Theodora's influence is legendary, but let's not get carried away. Some say she was a proto-feminist icon, while others argue her power was more about survival and less about smashing the patriarchy. She was known for her support of the Monophysites, a Christian sect that was out of favor, and worked to protect women's rights, including laws that prohibited forced prostitution. However, the romanticized view of Theodora as a constant champion for women's rights is a bit of a stretch. She was pragmatic, fiercely loyal to her own causes, and often ruthless in maintaining her power. And yes, she was involved in the infamous Nika riots of 532 AD, the Burning Man of Byzantine revolts, where angry chariot racing fans nearly burnt the city to the ground. It was Theodora who is famously quoted as saying, "Purple makes a fine shroud," meaning she'd rather die an empress than live in exile. Now, that's one way to keep a cool head while everything around you is on fire. But Theodora wasn't alone. Other women, like her niece Sophia, also wielded considerable power. though often behind the scenes. These women were adept at navigating the Byzantine court's treacherous waters, where alliances were as fragile as Corinthian glass. They played the long game, understanding that while men might wear the crown, it was often the women who kept it from slipping. In the end, the Byzantine Empire was a place where women could wield significant influence, albeit within a framework that often sought to limit them. They were mothers, wives, businesswomen, and occasionally empresses who left their mark on history through sheer will and savvy. So, as we peel back the layers of this ancient society, remember, behind every emperor, there was likely a woman rolling her eyes and whispering, "I told you so." Now, let's leave the lofty halls of power and take a stroll through the streets of Constantinople, where the real action is happening. Picture a bustling marketplace, not unlike your local farmer's market on steroids. It's noisy, chaotic, and full of life. Here, Byzantine women weren't just playing a supporting role, they were front and center, wheeling and dealing like Wall Street brokers with a penchant for haggling. Women in Byzantium were more economically active than you might expect from a society that often saw them as secondary characters in the grand historical drama. They ran businesses, from small market stalls to larger operations. Take the textile industry, for instance. This wasn't just about spinning yarn. It was an empire's fashion hub. Byzantine silk was the Gucci of the ancient world, and women were at the heart of this lucrative trade. They managed workshops, negotiated prices, and sometimes even controlled production. The empire needed silk like modern society needs Wi-Fi, and these women ensured the Byzantine elite wasn't caught in anything less than the finest threads. But it wasn't all silk and sunshine. Gritty reality was that many women were in business because they had to be. Widows or those without male relatives often had no choice but to fend for themselves. And let's not forget the lower classes. While aristocratic women might have had some level of agency, for the majority, life was a constant hustle. They worked as domestic servants, seamstresses, or in the food trade. You could find them selling bread or cheese, possibly negotiating a better deal for a handful of coins. It was a far cry from the romanticized image of the refined Byzantine lady sipping her wine in a marble courtyard. Speaking of romanticized images, let's venture into the cloistered world of Byzantine monasteries. To many, these were tranquil sanctuaries of prayer and contemplation. In reality, they were more like spiritual retirement homes for women who either chose or were forced to leave the secular world. Life in a monastery wasn't about escaping from reality, but finding a different version of it. Nuns managed their communities, which were often self-sustaining economic units. Forget the idea of passive contemplation. These women were active participants in their own survival, engaging in agriculture, textile production, and even manuscript illumination. The abbess, akin to a CEO, had to possess the wisdom of Solomon and the cunning of Machiavelli to keep things running smoothly. But let's not sugarcoat it. Choosing a monastic life often meant saying goodbye to personal freedom, autonomy, and sometimes even family. It was a life of strict rules and rigorous routines. However, for some women, being cloistered was preferable to the alternative, marriage in a male-dominated society where their voices were often drowned out by the clinking of armor and the rustling of imperial robes. And speaking of marriage, here's a fun fact. Byzantine marriages were more about contracts than love stories. They were arranged with the precision of a military campaign and often involved hefty dowries. Think of it as a business merger with some added emotional baggage. For the upper classes, these unions were strategic alliances aimed at consolidating wealth and power. And while love might occasionally bloom, it wasn't the priority. The dowry system ensured that women's economic contributions were acknowledged, albeit as part of a transaction where they were often the currency. Yet, amid this transactional nature, women could exert influence within the household, managing estates and family affairs. A successful household was like a small corporation, and the lady of the house was often its CFO. Balancing budgets, overseeing servants, and ensuring the smooth running of daily life, these women were the backbone of Byzantine domesticity. It was a role that required intelligence, diplomacy, and an ability to multitask that would make a modern executive break a sweat. While the Byzantine world might not have been a feminist utopia, it provided women with opportunities to exert influence in various spheres. The myth of the passive Byzantine woman is just that, a myth. They were active participants in an empire that was as glorious as it was tumultuous. And as we peel back the layers of history, we find that the story of Byzantine women isn't just about queens and empresses, but about everyday women who navigated a complex society with resilience and savvy. So, as the sun sets over the Bosphorus and the musing calls echo through the city, remember that behind the grand facade of the Byzantine Empire were women who kept the wheels turning. They were traders, nuns, and homemakers. They were mothers, daughters, and sometimes rulers in their own right. And as we continue our journey through this fascinating world, let's keep in mind that every thread of Byzantine history was woven with their stories. As the sun dips below the horizon of our Byzantine saga, let's pivot from the bustling streets of Constantinople to the sacred halls of religious influence, a place where divine inspiration mingled with earthly ambition. The Byzantine Empire, with its intense religious fervor, was a playground where women alternately found empowerment and confinement. This was a society where religion was as omnipresent as Wi-Fi in a modern cafe, and women had unique roles to play. First up, we have the veneration of female saints. Now, here's where the Byzantines got a little bit of Game of Thrones, mixed with a touch of sainthood. Women like St. Irene of Chrysovalentu, who was said to have miracle-working capabilities, became icons of piety and divine connection. These female saints were the original influencers, no Instagram needed. They were revered not just for their piety, but also for the stories of miracles that spread faster than a Byzantine rumor. Saint Thecla, another revered figure, was said to have survived burning at the stake by divine intervention. Talk about a hot topic. But let's not get too swept up in these tales. There was a duality at play here, a divine tension between reverence and subjugation. While female saints were uplifted as paragons of virtue, living women often found themselves in a less exalted state. The Byzantine Church wasn't exactly a bastion of gender equality. Women were generally excluded from the priesthood, and their roles in religious ceremonies were largely ornamental. Think of them as the supporting cast in a divine drama where men held the leading roles. Despite these limitations, women found ways to exercise influence within religious spheres. Take the powerful abbesses who ran monasteries with the efficiency of a Fortune 500 CEO. These women were the gatekeepers of spiritual life, managing properties, and often wielding considerable social influence. The Abbey of Holy Wisdom, for instance, was a hub of female authority, where abbesses like Irene of Chrysovalentu held sway over vast lands and resources. They were the original multitaskers, balancing prayer with property management. But let's cut through the incense smoke here. The life of an abbess wasn't all about spiritual enlightenment. The Byzantine Empire, despite its divine aspirations, had a distinctly earthly bureaucracy. Abbesses had to navigate church politics with the skill of a diplomat, often negotiating with male church authorities who viewed them as less than equals. It was a world where divine calling met with the harsh realities of ecclesiastical power structures. Speaking of power structures, let's dive into the impact of religious councils on women's agency. The Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, a gathering that sounds like it could be the world's longest board meeting, was one of many that solidified the Church's stance on various issues, including women's roles. These councils often reinforced a patriarchal view, emphasizing women's subordination and discouraging their active participation in church leadership. It's a bit like being invited to a dinner party, only to find out you're there to do the dishes. Yet, women persisted. They found ways to exert influence through religious patronage. Wealthy women often donated to the church, funding the construction of monasteries and churches, and in return, they gained a measure of influence. Empress Helena, mother of Constantine the Great, was one such benefactor. She funded numerous churches and was even credited with finding the true cross. Now that's a way to leave your mark, literally and spiritually. The Byzantine Empire, with its labyrinthine religious structures, presented women with a paradox. While the divine offered a path to reverence, earthly institutions often sought to confine them. It was a dance of devotion and defiance, where women navigated a world that both revered and restricted them. As we continue our journey through Byzantine history, remember that these women were more than just footnotes in a patriarchal society. They were saints, sinners, and everything in between. They played the roles they were given, but often rewrote the script. From the cloisters to the palaces, women in Byzantium were a testament to resilience in an empire that was as glorious as it was complex. So, as the echoes of ancient hymns fade into the night, let's hold on to the stories of these women who walked the tightrope between the sacred and the secular, leaving footprints that resonate through history. And as we prepare to delve further into this tale, keep in mind that the Byzantine Empire was a tapestry woven with threads of faith, power, and the indomitable spirit of women who refused to be merely silent witnesses to history. And speaking of the indomitable spirit, let's wade into the Byzantine political swamp, where the water's murky, the stakes are high, and the women, oh, the women, wield influence with a subtlety that would make a chess grandmaster proud. These ladies weren't just playing the game. They were reprogramming the rules behind the scenes. It's time to tip our hats to the power players of the Byzantine Empire, who maneuvered through the treacherous waters of marriage, regency, and manipulation with an aplomb that could make Machiavelli blush. Enter Irene of Athens, a woman whose political acumen was as sharp as a Byzantine dagger. Imagine this. It's the 8th century, and Irene is not content with just being the empress consort. No, she's got her eyes set on the prize, the imperial throne itself. In 797 AD, she managed to orchestrate a coup against her own son, Constantine VI, and had him blinded and deposed, effectively ending his reign. That's right, she chose power over maternal instincts, and if that sounds ruthless, well, it was. But it's also a testament to the lengths women had to go to be heard in a world that preferred them silent. Irene's rule was a masterclass in political maneuvering. For 5 years, she governed as the sole ruler of Byzantium, a rarity in an empire that generally preferred its emperors to be of the male persuasion. Her reign was marked by her attempts to restore the veneration of icons, which had been banned under previous rulers. Now, while her iconophilia might seem like a quaint theological debate to us, it was a heart-button issue back then, akin to modern-day political controversies. Her efforts to bring back icon worship were part of a larger strategy to consolidate her power by aligning herself with the church and the people who supported the veneration. Irene, in her own way, was rebranding the empire, one icon at a time. Yet, despite her efforts, Irene's reign was not to last. The Byzantine patriarchy was not about to let a woman keep the throne indefinitely. In 802 AD, she was overthrown by a faction that preferred the stability of a male ruler, and she was exiled to Lesbos, where she lived out her days weaving, perhaps pondering the fleeting nature of power. Her story is a cautionary tale of the thin line women had to walk between ambition and survival in Byzantine politics. But Irene wasn't the only woman to leave a mark on the empire's political landscape. Fast forward to the Macedonian dynasty, where women continued to play pivotal roles. Take Theophano, a woman whose life reads like a Byzantine soap opera. Originally a tavern keeper's daughter, she married Romanos Roman II, the emperor, and quickly became a significant political player. Her story is one of cunning and survival, as she navigated the treacherous waters of the Byzantine court with a deftness that belied her humble origins. After Romanos Roman II's untimely death in 963, Theophano didn't miss a beat. She married Nikephoros Roman II Phocas, a successful general, to secure her position. But when Nikephoros turned out to be less of a knight in shining armor and more of a restrictive ruler, Theophano took matters into her own hands. In one of Byzantine history's most infamous plots, she conspired with John Tzimiskes, Nikephoros' nephew, to murder her husband. The deed was done in 969, and John ascended to the throne, marrying Theophano and ensuring her continued influence in the empire. Talk about a power couple with a twist. Theophano's actions might seem like the stuff of legend, but they highlight a harsh reality. In a society that restricted women's overt power, they often resorted to covert means to achieve their ends. The political sphere was a chessboard, and women like Theophano and Irene played it with a strategy that was both ruthless and brilliant. It wasn't just about survival. It was about shaping the course of an empire, one move at a time. Yet, for all their cunning, these women's stories also underscore the precariousness of power in Byzantium. Theophano's influence waned when John Tzimiskes died in 976, and her son, Basil Roman II, came of age. She was exiled, stark reminder that in Byzantine politics, alliances were as fragile as spun glass. and women often bore the brunt of political shifts. In the Byzantine Empire, women's influence was a paradox. They were often the power behind the throne, yet rarely acknowledged in official records. Their stories, passed down through chronicles and legends, paint a picture of a society where women had to be as adaptable as they were ambitious. They navigated a complex web of alliances, marriages, and betrayals, always a step ahead, or at least trying to be. As we examine these stories, it's tempting to romanticize these women as proto-feminist icons, but that would be an oversimplification. Their actions were often driven by necessity as much as ambition, by survival as much as power. They were playing a game that was rigged against them, yet they played it with skill and determination. So, as we continue our exploration of the Byzantine Empire, let's keep in mind the stories of these formidable women who navigated the labyrinth of Byzantine politics. They were not just passive players in a male-dominated world, but active participants who shaped the course of history. And as we delve deeper into this fascinating saga, let's remember that behind every emperor was a woman who knew more than she let on, whispering strategies that would echo through the annals of time. As we delve into the legacy of Byzantine women, let's hit the pause button and rewind through history's labyrinth. These women weren't just footnotes in a dusty scroll. They were the unsung maestros orchestrating the grand Byzantine symphony. When we look at modern interpretations, there's a tendency to either put them on a pedestal or dismiss them as mere shadows behind the throne. The truth, as always, is somewhere in the middle, complex, messy, and entirely human. Let's talk about the evolution of their roles. Fast forward from the Byzantine era to today's world, where gender roles are as fluid as Constantinople's bustling Bosphorus Strait. In Byzantium, women were often seen as the glue holding the empire's social fabric together. They were the ones running businesses, managing estates, and sometimes pulling the strings of power from behind the curtain. Today, while glass ceilings are still very much a thing, there's a growing recognition that women bring a unique perspective to the table, something Byzantine women understood centuries ago. Consider the economic context. Byzantine women were not just economic participants, but essential players. In a society where the empire's prosperity could hinge on silk production, women weren't just silent operators. They were the CEOs of their own domains, ensuring the empire ran smoothly. This economic autonomy echoes today in the increasing number of women entrepreneurs who are redefining industries across the globe. It's a testament to the resilience and adaptability that transcends time. And what about the myths? The romanticized image of the Byzantine damsel in distress, waiting for a knight in shining armor. The reality was far grittier. Women like Theodora and Irene weren't sitting around waiting for a hero. They were the heroes of their own stories, sometimes in ways that would make even the boldest of modern feminists blush. They navigated a patriarchal society with shrewdness and a certain flair for the dramatic, proving that agency can wear many guises. The appeal of these myths is undeniable, but understanding the reality makes their stories even more compelling. Now, let's pivot to the political arena. The Byzantine Empire was a political minefield, and women like Theophano and Irene didn't just survive. They thrived, often playing the long game with the patience of a chess master. Today, as women continue to break into politics, their stories serve as both inspiration and cautionary tales. Their legacies remind us that power is rarely handed over. It is taken, often at great personal cost. The Byzantine empresses laid the groundwork for a narrative of female power that resonates in the corridors of power today. But let's not get too romantic here. The Byzantine Empire, for all its grandeur, was no feminist utopia. Women were often pawns in the imperial chess game. Their marriages used to fortify alliances and consolidate power. Happiness was optional, and love, well, that was often a nice-to-have rather than a must-have. In many ways, these women were the original multitaskers, balancing the demands of empire, family, and personal ambition with a dexterity that would impress any modern executive. And why do these stories still matter today? Because they echo our quest for gender equality. The Byzantine women's ability to adapt, innovate, and influence in a society that often sought to silence them mirrors the challenges women face today. Their stories are a reminder that history isn't just a record of what happened, but a guide to what can be achieved. As we continue to strive for equality, the tales of Byzantine women serve as both a mirror and a map. In wrapping up this saga, let's reflect on the broader significance of these ancient narratives. Byzantine women weren't just part of the empire's history, they were architects of its legacy. Their contributions, often overshadowed by their male counterparts, laid the groundwork for future generations. As we look to the past, we find a tapestry woven with threads of resilience, ambition, and ingenuity. And as we continue to carve out new paths for gender equality, let's carry forward the lessons of these remarkable women with us. So, as the curtain falls on this chapter of Byzantine history, let's remember that the empire's true legacy lies not just in its architectural marvels or its military conquests, but in the stories of its women. They were the silent orchestrators of change, the unsung heroines of an empire that was as complex as it was compelling. Their stories remind us that while history may not always repeat itself, it certainly rhymes, offering echoes of the past that resonate with the challenges and triumphs of today. Kublai Khan was not your typical Mongol chieftain, if such a thing even exists. Picture a man born to rule, yet who preferred the comforts of a palace to the windswept steppes. In a world where most leaders were busy perfecting their horseback archery skills, Kublai was more concerned with governance and culture. It's like he took one look at the Mongol lifestyle and thought, sure, but have you tried silk robes? In 1260, Kublai found himself at the helm of the Mongol Empire, a realm so vast it made other empires look like backyard projects. Stretching across Asia and into Europe, it was a logistical nightmare to manage. Imagine running a global corporation, but with more horses and fewer HR departments. Yet Kublai was not content to just hold the reins. He wanted to expand, conquer, and perhaps even civilize this colossal beast. The Mongols were renowned for their military prowess, but Kublai had a different vision. He saw the potential for a great civilization, not just a horde of warriors. This was a guy who didn't just want to win battles, he wanted to build cities. He was the Steve Jobs of his time, except with more empire building and less turtlenecks. His interest in Chinese culture was so deep, he could probably quote Confucius in his sleep. While his predecessors were setting up yurts, Kublai was eyeing up palatial digs in what would become Beijing. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before Kublai could indulge his architectural whims, he had to deal with the small matter of keeping a hold on power. The Mongol Empire was a family business, and like any family business, it was fraught with drama. After the death of his brother Merk Khan, Kublai had to contend with civil war, political intrigue, and sibling rivalries that make modern soap operas look like child's play. Forget Game of Thrones. This was the real deal, only with more yurts and fewer dragons. Kublai Khan's rise to power was marked by a series of strategic moves that would make any chess master proud. His victory in the Taluid Civil War in 1264 solidified his claim to the throne, but it didn't come easy. It was a classic tale of brother versus brother, with Kublai coming out on top against his rival, Eric Burke. Imagine Thanksgiving dinner with the Khans. Pass the kumis, but don't forget the poisoned chalice. Yet the absurdity of it all was not lost on Kublai. Here he was, a man trying to manage an empire from horseback. The mere logistics of it were mind-boggling. Mongol postal couriers, known as Yam, could deliver messages over a network stretching thousands of miles, but even they couldn't keep up with the demands of running an empire. It's like trying to send a tweet with carrier pigeons effective, but painfully slow. Despite these challenges, Kublai managed to transform the Mongol Empire from a loose confederation of tribes into a more structured state. He established a capital in Dadu, modern-day Beijing, and embraced Chinese administrative practices. This not only helped him maintain control, but also laid the foundation for the Yuan dynasty, which would rule China for nearly a century. It was a bold move, akin to a biker gang deciding to settle down and start a tech company. Of course, Kublai's penchant for palaces over yurts wasn't just about comfort. It was a strategic decision to integrate Chinese culture and governance into the Mongol way of life. He understood that, to rule effectively, he needed to adopt the customs and traditions of the people he conquered. It was less about building an empire and more about crafting a legacy. And let's face it, yurts are great, but they're not much for central heating. Kublai's vision was not without its critics. Many traditional Mongols viewed his affinity for Chinese culture with suspicion, fearing it would erode their nomadic lifestyle. It's a classic case of old guard versus new guard, a sort of cultural clash that's as ancient as history itself. But Kublai was undeterred. He was a man on a mission, and that mission involved lots of silk and porridge. In the end, Kublai Khan's early expansion efforts set the stage for a new chapter in the Mongol saga. While his predecessors were conquerors, he was a builder. His reign marked a shift from a purely military empire to a more multifaceted civilization, one that embraced the complexities of governance and culture. He was the odd one out, sure, but in the grand tapestry of history, it's the odd ones who often leave the biggest mark. So, as Kublai Khan gazed out from his palace, surveying the vast empire he was shaping, one can only imagine his thoughts. Perhaps he pondered the challenges ahead, or the legacy he would leave behind. Or maybe he was just trying to figure out how to get more spices into his next feast. Either way, Kublai was not just expanding an empire, he was redefining it. And in doing so, he ensured that his name would echo through the ages, long after the last yurt had folded. As Kublai Khan sat in his palace, contemplating the empire he was busy redefining, he was probably aware that his next move would be crucial. It's not every day you get to establish a dynasty, after all. By 1271, Kublai had officially proclaimed the Yuan dynasty, which was like launching a rebranded product with a Mongol twist. This was his declaration to the world. The Mongols weren't just here to conquer and run. They were here to stay. So long, nomadic tents. Hello, imperial courts. Now, let's address the big question everyone's been asking. How did Kublai Khan, a man whose ancestors were more familiar with the saddle than the scroll, managed to govern one of the largest and most diverse empires in history? Spoiler alert, it wasn't by sheer force alone. Kublai's genius lay in his ability to blend the brutal efficiency of the Mongol war machine with the nuanced governance of Chinese tradition. Think of it as mixing the horsepower of a Ferrari with the elegance of a Rolls-Royce. First, Kublai knew he needed a bureaucratic makeover. He wasn't about to let his empire run like a medieval version of a startup with too many cooks and not enough management. The Yuan administration was a marvel of organization, and Kublai wasn't shy about importing Chinese scholars to help him. He retained many elements of the Chinese civil service, but added a Mongolian flair. This included creating a four-tiered social hierarchy that prioritized Mongols and other non-Han groups at the top, much to the chagrin of the local literati. But hey, when you're rewriting the rules, not everyone's going to get a gold star. Under Kublai's watchful eye, the empire's postal system, the Yam, was revamped to facilitate communication across vast distances. It was like the Pony Express on steroids, with over 10 000 stations and 50 000 horses. Couriers could gallop across the steppes faster than you could say Silk Road, which incidentally was enjoying a renaissance of its own. The Mongol Empire under Kublai's reign was a bustling hub of trade, a veritable eBay of its time, where East met West in a marketplace of silk, spices, and ideas. Speaking of the Silk Road, Kublai understood its economic potential better than most. By securing the trade routes, he not only lined his coffers with gold, but also facilitated cultural exchanges that were unprecedented. The Yuan dynasty became a melting pot of cultures, languages, and religions. Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, and Taoists all found a place within Kublai's vast empire. It's as if he ran the world's largest open-minded festival, only with fewer music stages and more yaks. But let's not get too swept up in the romanticism. The reality was that Kublai's tolerance was as much about pragmatism as it was about idealism. By allowing various cultures to coexist, he reduced the likelihood of rebellion, ensuring that disparate groups were too busy trading to wage war against each other. And let's not forget, tolerance had its limits. The infamous White Lotus rebellion in the late Yuan period was a stark reminder that not everyone was happy with Kublai's multicultural vision. Sometimes the melting pot boiled over. Then there's the myth of the barbarian. To many outside observers, the Mongols were the rock stars of the ancient world, wild, untamed, and unpredictable. But under Kublai, the Mongol Empire proved to be far more sophisticated than any cavalier stereotype. His administration was a model of efficiency, with tax reforms that rivaled those of modern governments. Kublai introduced paper currency, a move that was as revolutionary as it was practical. Forget gold coins. This was the future of finance, and Kublai was its trailblazer. Of course, not everything Kublai touched turned to gold. The proposed invasion of Japan in 1274 and again in 1281 ended in failure, thanks in no small part to the infamous divine winds or kamikaze typhoons that wrecked his fleet. Even Kublai's ambitions had their limits, and Mother Nature wasn't on his payroll. But these setbacks didn't diminish his achievements. If anything, they highlighted the sheer audacity of his vision. After all, it takes a bold leader to risk it all on a roll of the cosmic dice. Kublai Khan's reign was a testament to the power of adaptability. He wasn't just a conqueror. He was a ruler who understood the complexities of governance in a multicultural empire. His ability to blend Mongol traditions with Chinese administration created a legacy that would endure long after his reign. His story is a reminder that history's greatest leaders aren't just warriors or statesmen. They're visionaries who see what others cannot. So, as Kublai Khan's empire stretched across a continent, it was clear that his legacy would be more than just a series of conquests. He had transformed the Mongol world, leaving an indelible mark on history. And while not every venture was a success, his achievements were nothing short of extraordinary. Kublai Khan wasn't just the ruler of an empire. He was the architect of a new era, man who saw beyond the horizon and dared to dream of what lay beyond. As Kublai Khan's empire stretched across a continent, it became apparent that his legacy would be more than just a series of conquests. But even a ruler of his stature could find himself at the mercy of the elements, as proven by his ill-fated attempts to take Japan. In 1274, Kublai decided it was time to expand his dominion across the sea. His plan was ambitious, to say the least. Launch a naval invasion against a nation that had never been breached by foreign powers. It's like trying to sneak into a party where the bouncer is Mother Nature herself. Let's get one thing straight. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill military campaign. Imagine organizing a corporate retreat, but on a scale that could bankrupt a small country. We're talking about assembling a fleet of 900 ships and around 40,000 troops, including Mongol, Chinese, and Korean soldiers. This was a logistical nightmare that would make even the most seasoned event planner break out in a cold sweat. The costs were astronomical, with resources being drained faster than you can say imperial overreach. Ships had to be built, supplies gathered, and soldiers equipped, all while coordinating across vast distances and linguistic divides. But Kublai was not one to be deterred by trivial matters like logistics and financial hemorrhaging. His fleet set sail, and for a brief moment, things looked promising. They landed on the shores of Kyushu, Japan, and clashed with the samurai defenders. The Mongol forces, with their superior numbers and advanced weaponry, including gunpowder bombs, seemed poised for victory. Yet, just as success was within grasp, the heavens opened up. Enter the kamikaze, or divine wind, a typhoon that decimated the Mongol fleet and put an end to Kublai's dreams of conquest, for the moment. The romanticized tale of the kamikaze speaks to the allure of divine intervention, a comforting narrative that suggests the gods themselves stepped in to protect Japan. But let's not get swept away in the poetry of it all. The harsh reality was that these typhoons were common in the region, and the Mongol fleet was ill-prepared for such a ferocious storm. Ships were smashed to kindling, and thousands of soldiers were lost. It was a brutal reminder that even the most powerful ruler could not command the weather. Undeterred, Kublai tried again in 1281, a testament to his relentless ambition, or perhaps a stubborn refusal to take a hint. This time, he went even bigger, assembling a force of over 4,000 ships and upwards of 140,000 men, drawn from across the empire. The fleet was divided into two groups, one setting off from Korea and the other from southern China, converging on Kyushu like a massive pincer. The scale of this operation was unprecedented, a logistical jigsaw puzzle with thousands of moving pieces that required precise coordination. It was the medieval equivalent of trying to launch a moon landing with a fleet of rowboats. Yet despite the careful planning, the Mongols were again met with disaster. After months of skirmishes and a costly siege on the island of Kyushu, the second kamikaze struck. This typhoon was even more devastating than the first, wiping out a significant portion of the fleet and forcing a humiliating retreat. It was as if the elements themselves had conspired against Kublai, thwarting his ambition and underscoring the limits of his power. What does this tell us about Kublai Khan? For one, it highlights the audacity of his vision, a leader who dared to dream of an empire that spanned both land and sea. But it also reveals the inherent risks of overextension, a cautionary tale about the dangers of biting off more than you can chew, especially when the weather's involved. The failed invasions of Japan were not just a defeat. They were a financial and moral blow that exposed the vulnerabilities of even the mightiest empire. Yet, in true Kublai fashion, these setbacks did not dampen his resolve. If anything, they reinforced his determination to leave a lasting legacy. While he may not have succeeded in conquering Japan, his ambitions left an indelible mark on history, a testament to the complexities and contradictions of his reign. Kublai was a man who reached for the stars, even when the storms threatened to bring him back down to earth. And so, as the Mongol Empire continued to evolve under Kublai's rule, it became clear that his story was far from over. He may have been thwarted by the winds of fate, but his vision endured, a reminder that history is often shaped by those who dare to dream, even in the face of insurmountable odds. The tale of Kublai Khan is one of ambition, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of greatness, a narrative that continues to captivate and inspire, even as the typhoons rage on. As the Mongol Empire continued to unfold under Kublai Khan's ambitious gaze, it was clear that the challenges of ruling such a vast domain were just as formidable as the typhoons that had thwarted his naval dreams. Sure, managing an empire the size of the Mongol realm is the kind of logistical nightmare that even the most ambitious project manager would balk at. But Kublai was not your average ruler. He was a man whose ambitions stretched as far as the Silk Road itself. Yet, as the years rolled on, the cracks in the empire's gilded facade began to show. Kublai had always been a man of vision, but by the 1280, the reality of governing a multicultural empire from the comfort of Xanadu was proving to be a Herculean task. Imagine trying to host a multicultural festival where everyone from horse archers to Confucian scholars was trying to get a word in edgewise. The Mongol Empire was a colossal beast, and Kublai was struggling to keep its many heads from biting each other off. The empire, stretching from the Korean peninsula to Eastern Europe, was as diverse as it was expansive. The population was a veritable tapestry of ethnicities, languages, and religions. This diversity was both a strength and a weakness. On one hand, it fostered a rich cultural exchange that made the Yuan dynasty a beacon of innovation. On the other, it was a powder keg of potential rebellion, with each faction vying for its slice of the imperial pie. As if governing this sprawling empire wasn't challenging enough, Kublai had to contend with economic strains that would make any modern economist shudder. The Mongol Empire was a global trading powerhouse, but even its coffers had limits. The costs of maintaining the extensive postal system, military campaigns, and the luxurious court in Xanadu were astronomical. It was like trying to fund a space program on a lemonade stand budget. To put it in perspective, Kublai's failed invasions of Japan alone were estimated to have cost the equivalent of billions in today's currency. Inflation became a persistent thorn in Kublai's side. His decision to introduce paper currency, initially a masterstroke of financial innovation, began to backfire as counterfeit notes flooded the market. It turns out, once people realize they can print their own money, the economy tends to suffer. This led to a crisis of confidence in the yuan currency, exacerbating the already strained economy. While Kublai was busy grappling with economic woes, trouble was brewing closer to home. The empire's internal stability was being undermined by growing discontent among the Han Chinese population. The Mongols had always been seen as foreign rulers, and their policies did little to endear them to the local populace. The rigid social hierarchy, which placed Mongols at the top, left many feeling marginalized and resentful. It was the kind of social stratification that makes modern office politics look like a kindergarten squabble. By the late 1340, this simmering discontent began to boil over into outright rebellion. Enter the Red Turban Rebellion, a movement that would challenge the very foundations of Mongol rule in China. Named for the distinctive red headbands worn by its followers, the rebellion was as much a religious uprising as it was a political one. It drew heavily on the teachings of the White Lotus Society, a Buddhist sect that preached salvation through the Maitreya Buddha, an appealing message for those feeling oppressed under Mongol rule. The Red Turban Rebellion was not just a thorn in the empire's side, it was a dagger aimed at its heart. The rebels successfully captured several key cities, undermining the Mongol authority and demonstrating just how fragile their hold on power had become. It was like watching a game of Jenga, where the once sturdy structure began to wobble precariously, threatening to collapse at any moment. Kublai Khan's later years were a testament to the challenges of maintaining an empire that was as unwieldy as it was diverse. His vision of a multicultural empire was noble, but the practical realities of governance proved to be a relentless adversary. The economic strains, coupled with internal strife and rebellion, made it increasingly difficult to keep the empire from fracturing. It was a classic case of ambition meeting reality, where the romantic appeal of a united empire clashed with the harsh truths of human nature. In the end, Kublai Khan's struggles highlight the complexities of ruling an empire that spanned continents and cultures. His legacy is a reminder that even the most powerful rulers must contend with the limits of their own ambitions. As Kublai grappled with the challenges of his later years, it became clear that the story of his empire was far from over. The Mongol Empire was a living testament to the power of vision, resilience, and the ever-present struggle between unity and division. So, as the Mongol Empire faced the stormy seas of rebellion and economic turmoil, Kublai Khan's legacy hung in the balance. It was a story of grandeur and grit, a testament to the enduring complexity of human ambition. The tale of Kublai Khan is one that continues to captivate, a narrative of dreams and realities, where the line between legend and history is as blurred as the horizon he once sought to conquer. Yet as the Mongol Empire weathered the stormy seas of rebellion and economic turmoil, Kublai Khan's legacy was already beginning to take shape, like a sprawling mural painted across the canvas of history. By the time Kublai passed away in 1294, he'd left an indelible mark on the world, a feat that even the most ambitious rulers could only dream of achieving. But let's not kid ourselves. His legacy is a mixed bag, blend of visionary governance and inevitable decline. Kublai's death marked the beginning of the end for the Mongol Empire, a vast domain that started to unravel like a poorly knit sweater. You see, maintaining control over such an enormous and diverse territory was like trying to hold water in a sieve. The empire had always been something of a patchwork quilt, stitched together from the cultures and peoples Kublai had managed to unite. But without his steady hand guiding the ship, the seams began to fray. The Yuan dynasty, Kublai's pride and joy, was the first to feel the tremors of change. His successors, lacking his political acumen and charisma, struggled to keep the dynasty afloat. Imagine inheriting the world's largest sandcastle only to watch it crumble under the tide. The Mongol rulers that followed were plagued by internal strife and external pressures, a deadly cocktail that would eventually lead to their downfall. The economic strains that had begun under Kublai only worsened as the years went on. The government's penchant for lavish spending continued unabated, and by the mid-14th century, the Yuan dynasty's finances were in shambles. Inflation soared faster than a Mongol horse on a caffeine kick, and social unrest simmered like a pot about to boil over. The Red Turban Rebellion, which Kublai had managed to keep at bay, now erupted with renewed vigor, laying bare the vulnerabilities of Mongol rule. But let's not gloss over the romanticized allure of Kublai's reign. His empire was a melting pot of cultures, a testament to the power of diversity and exchange. The Silk Road, under his watchful eye, had become a highway of innovation, where ideas and goods traveled faster than a rumor at a royal court. It was a golden age of trade, where the East and West met in a bustling marketplace of silk, spices, and stories. Kublai's openness to different cultures and religions was a masterstroke of diplomacy, a reminder that the most successful empires are those that embrace rather than exclude. Yet, the harsh reality was that the Mongol Empire's reach exceeded its grasp. The very diversity that was its strength also sowed the seeds of its undoing. The social hierarchies that Kublai had established left many groups feeling marginalized, a sentiment that festered into open rebellion. The Yuan dynasty, despite its cultural achievements, was seen by many as an occupying force, an empire of outsiders that couldn't shake its barbarian label, no matter how many Confucian scholars it employed. So, what lessons can we draw from Kublai Khan's tumultuous reign? For starters, it's a classic tale of ambition meeting practicality, where the grand dreams of an empire builder crash into the gritty realities of governance. Kublai's vision was nothing short of revolutionary, but it was also a reminder that even the most visionary leaders must contend with the challenges of maintaining unity in a diverse and sprawling empire. The Mongol Empire, under his rule, was a testament to the complexities of power, how it can be both a unifying force and a source of division. Kublai's legacy also underscores the importance of adaptability. His ability to blend Mongol traditions with Chinese administrative practices was a stroke of genius, but it required constant balancing. It's a lesson that echoes through history. The most resilient empires are those that can evolve with the times rather than cling to the past. Kublai's story is one of evolution, a narrative of growth and adaptation that has resonated through the ages. Yet, the decline of his empire serves as a cautionary tale about the limits of power. Kublai was a man who dared to dream big, but his successors struggled to maintain his vision. The challenges of governance, the economic strains, the social unrest, the constant threat of rebellion proved insurmountable in the long run. It was a reminder that even the most powerful empires are finite, subject to the same forces of change and decay that shape all of history. As we wrap up this saga of Kublai Khan, let's not forget the romanticized allure that surrounds his legacy. The stories of his vast empire, his cultural achievements, and his audacious dreams continue to capture the imagination. But it's equally important to remember the realities that lay beneath the surface, the logistical nightmares, the economic woes, the social fractures. Kublai's reign was a tapestry woven from both legend and reality, a narrative that continues to captivate and instruct. In the end, Kublai Khan was more than just a ruler. He was an architect of a new era, a man who dared to envision a world where cultures collided and coalesced. His story is a testament to the power of ambition and the challenges of governance, a narrative that echoes through the corridors of history. As the dust of the Mongol Empire settles, we're left with a legacy that is as complex and multifaceted as the man himself. So, as you close the chapter on Kublai Khan, remember that history is a dance between romance and reality, a delicate balance of dreams and truths that defines the human experience. Kublai's tale is a reminder that even the grandest visions must contend with the gritty realities of life, a narrative that continues to inspire and caution, long after the last yurt has folded and the empire has faded into the annals of time. The Phoenicians were like the rock stars of the ancient Mediterranean world, but instead of guitars, they wielded ships, and their chart-topping hits were trade routes. Around 1500 BCE, these savvy seafarers set up shop where modern Lebanon stands today, and let's just say they didn't waste time getting to know their neighbors. With a coastline as their launchpad, they turned the Mediterranean into their personal autobahn of commerce, ferrying goods like a well-oiled, ancient version of Amazon Prime. Only, unlike Amazon, the Phoenicians didn't need an app, just a keen eye on the stars and a knack for haggling. Now, before we dive into their sea-savvy escapades, let's clear up a little misconception. The Phoenicians have been cast in the romantic glow of history as mystical mariners, some sort of nautical ninjas with secret sea spells up their sleeves. But in reality, they were more like the ancient world's version of your ultra-efficient, spreadsheet-loving uncle. They didn't rely on magic. They relied on skill, innovation, and a healthy dose of practicality. These folks used a mix of astute navigation skills and the latest technology of the time, like the star chart and the trusty wind, to dominate the seas. So, how did these maritime masters start their journey? Well, they were originally a bunch of city dwellers from places like Byblos, Sidon, and Tyre. Think of these cities as the bustling startup hubs of the ancient world. Each city was its own little kingdom, but they all shared a common goal: to make a splash in the big, blue Mediterranean. And splash they did. By the time they were done, the Phoenicians had darted the Mediterranean coastline with colonies like Carthage, which would later give the Romans a serious run for their money. Their secret weapon wasn't so secret at all. It was their ships. Picture a sleek, sturdy vessel, streamlined for speed and loaded with cargo. The Phoenicians perfected what was essentially the cargo ship of the ancient world, making it possible to transport everything from Egyptian papyrus to Greek olive oil with ease. They even had a special kind of ship called a bireme, boasting 2 rows of oars and a battering ram on the front for when negotiations got a little heated. The beauty of these ships lay not just in their design, but in their integration into a vast network of trade that connected cultures and economies like never before. Speaking of trade, let's talk about what the Phoenicians were actually lugging across the sea. Their ships were veritable floating marketplaces, carrying goods as diverse as cedarwood, glass, and Tyrian purple dye, the latter being a luxury item so exclusive it made ancient fashionistas swoon. This dye, extracted from the murex snail, was worth its weight in gold, quite literally, and was so labor-intensive it made modern haute couture look like fast fashion. The demand for this vibrant hue was so high that even emperors and kings were clamoring for just a thread of it. But the Phoenicians didn't just trade in goods, they traded in culture and ideas too. As they sailed from port to port, they spread the alphabet. Yes, the very foundation of our written communication, like ancient influencers with a knack for virality. The Phoenician alphabet was an ingenious system of 22 characters that streamlined writing and influenced scripts from Greek to Latin. It was the linguistic equivalent of a game-changing app update that made everything easier. No wonder it caught on like wildfire. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Why do the Phoenicians often seem like the forgotten middle child of ancient history? Well, they didn't leave behind grand monuments or sprawling empires. Instead, they left a legacy of connectivity and commerce, which, let's face it, doesn't make for the same dramatic ruins that archaeologists like to dig up. But make no mistake, their impact was profound. They were the unsung heroes of ancient globalization, paving the way for the interconnected world we take for granted today. Of course, the Phoenicians weren't just about business. They had a flair for the dramatic too. Their religious practices, for instance, featured deities like Melkart, who was something of a hybrid between Hercules and a local god. And their rituals, let's just say they could get a bit intense. Accounts of child sacrifice, though debated, suggest their religious fervor sometimes took a dark turn. Yet, like any good myth, these stories have been exaggerated over time, painting the Phoenicians as more ominous than they likely were. Despite their contributions, the Phoenicians didn't always get the credit they deserved. Much of what we know comes from the writings of other cultures, who often saw them as crafty and cunning. Herodotus, that old gossip, described them as shrewd traders. Others, like the Romans, saw them as rivals. But through it all, the Phoenicians kept their eyes on the prize, a thriving trade network that kept the ancient economy buzzing. In the end, the Phoenicians were less about the flash and more about the substance. They were the ultimate pragmatists, using their geographical position and maritime prowess to create a legacy of trade and innovation. So next time you're ordering a package with a single swipe, spare a thought for the Phoenicians, the original masters of the sea, whose ancient shipping lanes set the stage for our interconnected world. And remember, sometimes the real magic lies not in mysticism, but in the meticulous art of making the world just a little bit smaller, one shipment at a time. Now, let's take a peek behind the luxurious curtain of Tyre, the Phoenician hotspot that turned a sea snail into the ultimate status symbol. If you thought the modern fashion industry had a penchant for exclusivity, wait until you hear about Tyrian purple. This dye was the ancient equivalent of a designer label, a must-have for anyone who was anyone in the Mediterranean's elite circles. Picture this. A single gram of Tyrian purple required thousands of murex snails, which means every inch of purple fabric was more precious than gold. If that sounds like an exaggeration, consider this. Roman Emperor Diocletian capped the price of purple at 150,000 denarii per pound. For context, that's enough to buy a small army. So, how did the Phoenicians corner the market on this high-demand hue? It was all about the mollusk magic. The process was as painstaking as it was pungent. Imagine harvesting tens of thousands of snails, extracting the gooey substance, and then letting it ferment in the sun. The smell. Let's just say it was the price you paid for exclusivity. But the end result was a dye so vivid and enduring that it became synonymous with royalty and power. Forget about the red carpet. If you were draped in Tyrian purple, you owned the room. This wasn't just about fashion. It was a statement of wealth and influence, a visual power play that said, "I'm important." And speaking of strutting your stuff, the Phoenicians were no strangers to the economics of supply and demand. They understood that scarcity drove desire, so they kept the production process shrouded in secrecy. By monopolizing the murex-rich coasts and controlling the distribution, they ensured that Tyrian purple remained an elite indulgence. This wasn't just a business, it was a brand, and the Phoenicians were its savvy CEOs, masters of marketing long before the word existed. Now, this wasn't just a case of build it, and they will come. The Phoenicians had to navigate a complex web of trade routes, each with its own set of challenges. Pirates, for instance, were the ancient equivalent of today's internet hackers, lurking in the shadows ready to pounce. But the Phoenicians weren't easily daunted. They fortified their ships, employed armed escorts, and even cut deals with local powers to secure safe passage. They were the original tough negotiators, willing to haggle over everything from spices to security. The competition was fierce, and the Phoenicians had to be strategic. They couldn't just rely on their maritime prowess. They had to leverage their position as middlemen between various cultures. This meant building relationships, establishing colonies, and sometimes, yes, playing different powers against each other. It was a delicate dance of diplomacy and trade, but one that they performed with remarkable skill. The cost of doing business, however, was significant. Running a trade empire required more than just ships and snails. It required influence, intelligence, and let's face it, a bit of cunning. The Phoenicians were adept at maintaining a delicate balance of power, often playing the role of the neutral party in conflicts. They were the Switzerland of the ancient world, where neutrality was not just preferable but profitable. Yet, in their quest for economic dominance, the Phoenicians also had to contend with their own mythology. They were seen as both the wily traders and the mysterious mariners, a dual identity that served them well. On one hand, it allowed them to be underestimated by rivals who bought into the idea of the mystical Phoenician. On the other, it gave them a certain allure that made their goods even more desirable. It's the classic case of myth bolstering reality. Part of their genius lay in harnessing the power of their own narrative. And while the Tyrian purple business was their crown jewel, it was far from their only venture. The Phoenicians were economic polymaths, diversifying their portfolio with everything from glass and wine to metals and textiles. They were the ultimate ancient entrepreneurs, always looking for the next big thing, the next market to corner. In many ways, they were the original global traders, turning the Mediterranean into their own bustling marketplace. As we delve deeper into their world, it's clear that the Phoenicians were far more than the sum of their myths. They were pragmatic pioneers, turning obstacles into opportunities, and their legacy of trade and innovation continues to ripple through history. Their story isn't just about what they traded, but how they changed the game, creating a new world order based on commerce and connectivity. And in the grand tapestry of history, that's a legacy as vibrant as any shade of purple. As we sail into the political waters of the Phoenicians, let's drop anchor and take a look at how these ancient mariners weren't just trading tycoons, but also political powerhouses. Picture the Mediterranean as the ultimate high-stakes game of risk, with empires like the Egyptians, Assyrians, and Babylonians all jostling for control. Enter the Phoenicians, the savvy players who knew how to roll the dice in their favor without getting crushed under anyone's imperial heel. First up, let's debunk the cozy myth that the Phoenicians were just gentle merchants, floating from port to port, with nothing but peace and prosperity on their minds. Sure, they were merchants, but they were also masters of the political chessboard, deftly maneuvering their way through a landscape rife with larger, hungrier empires looking to gobble up smaller fry. The Phoenicians knew that if they wanted to keep their cities like Tyre and Sidon bustling with trade, they had to play the diplomatic game, and play it well. Now, you might wonder, how did they manage to keep their independence while nestled between giants? The answer lies in their uncanny ability to adapt and negotiate, often pitting one empire against another to maintain their autonomy. When the Egyptians were on a roll, the Phoenicians would cozy up to them, offering valuable trade connections and luxury goods like our favorite murex-dyed textiles. But when the Assyrians started flexing their muscles, the Phoenicians were quick to switch gears, ensuring their survival by paying tribute or offering military support. It was like watching a master poker player bluff their way to the final table, never showing their full hand, but always staying in the game. Take the city of Tyre, for instance. When the mighty Assyrian King Shalmaneser Roman III came knocking around 858 BCE, demanding tribute, the Phoenicians didn't just hand over their lunch money. They negotiated terms that allowed them to maintain a degree of self-governance while acknowledging Assyrian supremacy. It's the classic case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. They'd ally with whoever offered the best deal at the time, keeping their cities' coffers full and their autonomy intact. And let's not forget about the Babylonians, who also wanted a piece of the Mediterranean pie. The Phoenicians, ever the astute diplomats, were careful to keep Babylonian leaders like Nebuchadnezzar Roman II on side. During his reign in the 6th century BCE, Nebuchadnezzar laid siege to Tyre for a whopping 13 years, but the city didn't crumble. Instead, they played the long game, eventually reaching an agreement that allowed them to continue their trade operations with minimal interference. It's worth noting that the Phoenicians' political savvy wasn't just about playing defense. They were proactive, too, establishing colonies throughout the Mediterranean that served as strategic outposts, from Cyprus to Carthage. These colonies weren't just about trade, they were also about influence, creating a network of allied cities that could support each other in times of trouble. It was like having a backup plan with some serious dividends. Speaking of Carthage, let's take a moment to appreciate this Phoenician colony that would later rise to become a formidable power in its own right. Founded around 814 BCE, Carthage was strategically positioned on the North African coast, serving as a critical link between the Phoenician homeland and their far-flung trading partners. Over time, it would evolve into a major player on the Mediterranean stage, famously butting heads with Rome in the Punic Wars, but that's a story for another time. For now, it's enough to note that Carthage's rise was a testament to the far-reaching influence of Phoenician diplomacy and strategy. Of course, diplomacy wasn't just about making friends and influencing people. Sometimes, it involved a bit of subterfuge and not-so-gentle persuasion. The Phoenicians were known to employ mercenaries to protect their interests, hire spies to gather intelligence, and use subversion to weaken their enemies. In a world where might often made right, they understood that a well-placed bribe or a cleverly worded treaty could be just as effective as a battalion of soldiers. But let's not paint too rosy a picture. The Phoenicians were pragmatic to a fault, and their pursuit of profit and power sometimes led them down darker paths. Accounts from rival cultures often describe them as cunning and untrustworthy, a reputation that was perhaps earned through some of their more ruthless tactics. For instance, while they were often seen as neutral parties in conflicts between larger empires, they didn't hesitate to exploit these situations to their advantage, sometimes playing both sides against the middle to ensure the best possible outcome for themselves. In this complex web of alliances and rivalries, the Phoenicians managed not only to survive, but to thrive. They were the ultimate realists, understanding that in a world dominated by empires, the key to survival wasn't brute strength, but clever diplomacy and strategic thinking. By maintaining a delicate balance of power, they ensured that their cities remained independent and prosperous for centuries. So, as we navigate the choppy seas of Phoenician politics, let's dispel the notion that they were just peaceful traders floating along with the tides. In reality, they were shrewd political operators, adept at navigating the treacherous waters of ancient geopolitics with skill and precision. Their legacy isn't just one of trade and innovation, but also one of diplomacy and strategy, setting the stage for a world where commerce and politics were inextricably linked. And while their story is far from over, it's clear that the Phoenicians were far more than the sum of their parts. They were the ultimate pragmatists, using their wits and their wiles to carve out a place for themselves in a world that often seemed intent on swallowing them whole. As we continue to explore their legacy, we'll see that their influence extended far beyond the trade routes they dominated, shaping the political landscape of the ancient world in ways that still resonate today. But hold onto your hats, because the Phoenician saga is only just beginning. In the next part of our journey, we'll dive deeper into their cultural contributions, examining how their innovations in language, art, and religion left an indelible mark on the civilizations that followed. So, stay tuned as we unravel the threads of Phoenician history, one layer at a time, revealing a tapestry as rich and complex as the people who wove it. As we unravel the threads of Phoenician history, one thing becomes abundantly clear. These folks weren't just about moving goods from point A to B. They were cultural masterminds who left an indelible mark on everything they touched. Let's dive into their greatest hit, the alphabet, a little invention that rewrote the rulebook of communication, setting the stage for linguistic revolutions. All right, so we all know the alphabet is kind of a big deal, right? It's the reason we can text our friends, write epic novels, or even scrawl our grocery lists. But before we had our beloved ABCs, writing was a bit of a mess. Picture Mesopotamia around 3200 BCE, where cuneiform was the latest craze, a system that practically required a PhD to decipher. Over in Egypt, hieroglyphs were all the rage, but good luck writing a quick love note with those elaborate symbols. Enter the Phoenicians, stage left, around 1050 BCE, with their 22-character alphabet that was a game-changer in every sense. Now, let's set the record straight. The Phoenicians didn't just borrow this concept and call it a day. This alphabet wasn't like those knockoff designer bags you find at a flea market. No, this was an original, sleek design, more akin to the latest tech gadget everyone wanted a piece of. It was phonetic, meaning each symbol represented a sound, not a whole word or idea, making it accessible and easy to learn. The Phoenicians took a complex system and stripped it down to its essentials, a bit like swapping a bulky desktop for a streamlined smartphone. But why did this matter so much? In a word, accessibility. With a phonetic alphabet, literacy became a realistic goal for more than just scribes and priests. This democratization of writing meant that communication could spread faster than a viral tick-tock dance. As the Phoenicians sailed their ships across the Mediterranean, they carried this linguistic innovation with them, leaving a trail of letters in their wake. The Greeks caught on pretty quickly, adopting and adapting the Phoenician alphabet into something that would eventually morph into the Latin script we use today. It's like the Phoenicians dropped the hardest mixtape of the ancient world, and everyone wanted a copy. The Greeks decided to remix it, adding vowels and tweaking a few things, and the Romans took it further, setting the foundation for the alphabet that would go on to dominate Western languages. This wasn't just a fad. It was a full-blown revolution in communication, changing the way ideas spread and cultures connected. But hold up, before we crown the Phoenicians as the sole inventors of modern communication, let's debunk the myth that they were just cultural magpies, borrowing from everyone else. Sure, they were influenced by their neighbors. Who wasn't back then? But they were far more than mere borrowers. They were innovators who knew how to synthesize and elevate what they found, turning it into something greater. Take their art and architecture, for example. The Phoenicians were masters of blending styles, borrowing motifs from Egypt and Mesopotamia, and then adding their unique spin. Their art often featured intricate carvings and reliefs with a distinct flair, combining human figures, animals, and mythical creatures in ways that were both familiar and refreshingly new. They didn't just copy, they curated and created, crafting a visual language that spoke to their cosmopolitan identity. In terms of architecture, while they may not have left behind grand pyramids or colossal statues, the Phoenicians were practical innovators. Their cities were fortified marvels, designed with defense in mind, which was pretty crucial when you're sitting on prime real estate coveted by every ambitious empire. The city of Tyre, for example, was a fortress island, connected to the mainland by a narrow causeway, making it nearly impregnable to invaders. This wasn't just about staying safe. It was about asserting dominance and control over key trade routes. Yet, despite their impressive contributions, the myth persists that the Phoenicians were merely the middlemen of culture, ferrying ideas and goods without adding much of their own. This is where Romanticism blinds us to the truth. Yes, they were the great connectors, the ancient world's version of a social network, but they were also creators in their own right. They were the DJs of antiquity, mixing cultural beats from all around the Mediterranean into a symphony that resonated across time and space. The Phoenicians understood the power of storytelling, not just in their art or architecture, but in their very existence. They navigated a world where myth and reality were often indistinguishable, using their reputation as savvy traders and mysterious mariners to their advantage. This dual identity was both a shield and a sword, allowing them to move fluidly through different cultures while maintaining their distinct identity. And let's not forget the economic context. The Phoenicians weren't just about pretty pictures and clever scripts. They were shrewd operators who knew how to make their cultural capital work for them. By spreading the alphabet, they didn't just revolutionize communication. They facilitated trade and commerce on an unprecedented scale. It was a brilliant move, ensuring their language, and by extension, their influence, spread far and wide. So, as we continue to explore the depths of Phoenician history, let's discard the notion that they were mere cultural borrowers. They were innovators, visionaries who shaped the world in ways that still echo today. Their story is one of extraordinary creativity and adaptability, a testament to the power of ideas and the relentless human drive to connect and communicate. Stay tuned, because in the next chapter, we'll dive even deeper into the cultural legacy of the Phoenicians, exploring how their innovations in religion and mythology influenced the civilizations that followed. We'll peel back the layers of their complex belief systems, revealing a tapestry as rich and intricate as the people who wove it. So, keep your eyes on the horizon as we continue our journey through the fascinating world of the Phoenicians. Let's continue to unravel the Phoenicians' cultural tapestry, exploring their religious landscape, which was as complex and layered as a millefeuille pastry. Minus the puff pastry and sugar, of course. The Phoenicians weren't just hoarding trade secrets. They also had a rich pantheon that reflected their diverse interactions with neighboring cultures. Think of it as a divine cocktail party where Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and local deities mingled, swapped stories, and maybe even exchanged some celestial business cards. Their religious practices were a fascinating blend of the familiar and the unique. Central to their pantheon was Baal, a storm and fertility god who was as popular as a pop star, albeit with more thunder and less auto-tune. Then there was Astarte, the goddess of love and war, who seemed to have a dual personality that could give any soap opera character a run for their money. These deities weren't just worshipped in grand temples, but were integral to daily life. Think less grand cathedrals, more local community centers, where spirituality was woven into the fabric of existence. But here's a twist. The myths of child sacrifice often associated with Phoenician religion might just be ancient propaganda. While there is some archaeological evidence suggesting the Phoenicians practiced votive offerings, a grim practice if true, it's worth noting that much of this narrative comes from their rivals. The Greeks and Romans, in particular, had a flair for spinning tales that painted the Phoenicians as exotic and, quite frankly, terrifying. It's the classic case of othering a culture to justify your own superiority, a tactic that echoes throughout history and even into modern times. Yet, despite these darker stories, there was a profound beauty in Phoenician spirituality. Their religious festivals were lively affairs, complete with music, dance, and feasting. These celebrations weren't just about appeasing the gods. They were community events that reinforced social bonds and cultural identity. Religion was less about dogma and more about community, a reminder of the human need for connection and belonging. Now, let's pivot to their silent but significant legacy, navigation. The Phoenicians were the GPS of the ancient world, long before satellites were a glint in the sky. They mastered the art of celestial navigation, using the stars as their guide. The North Star, for instance, was their trusty compass long before compasses were even a thing. Their expertise in sailing and shipbuilding allowed them to venture further than most dared, creating a network of trade routes that spanned the Mediterranean and beyond. The practical implications of this are staggering. By linking disparate regions through trade, the Phoenicians facilitated cultural exchanges that would otherwise have taken centuries. Goods weren't just exchanged. Ideas were, too. This exchange laid the groundwork for what we now call globalization, a concept that feels modern, but is as ancient as the Phoenicians themselves. They were the original connectors, showing us that in a world increasingly divided, the bridges we build matter more than the walls we erect. Yet, for all their accomplishments, the Phoenicians often find themselves overshadowed by their flashier neighbors, the Greeks with their philosophers, and the Romans with their legions. It's like the ancient world's equivalent of being the talented middle child, forever playing second fiddle to the overachieving siblings. But here's the thing. While the Greeks and Romans built empires that eventually crumbled, the Phoenicians left a more subtle yet enduring legacy. They didn't need grand monuments. Their legacy was embedded in the very fabric of civilization, much like a well-woven thread in an ancient tapestry. Their story is a testament to the power of subtlety. In a world obsessed with grand gestures and monumental achievements, the Phoenicians remind us that sometimes the most profound changes are those that happen quietly, beneath the surface. Their influence on language, commerce, and navigation may not have been as immediately visible as a towering pyramid or a Roman aqueduct, but it was no less significant. So, what can we learn from the Phoenicians today? In a global economy that often feels like a chaotic whirlpool of competing interests, the Phoenicians offer a lesson in the power of connection and adaptability. They thrived not by dominating, but by collaborating, by finding common ground amidst diversity. Their ability to adapt, innovate, and embrace the new is a reminder that in a rapidly changing world, flexibility is a strength, not a weakness. As we wrap up our journey through the world of the Phoenicians, let's take a moment to appreciate their understated genius. They were the unsung architects of a connected world, their influence rippling through time like the gentle waves that once carried their ships across the Mediterranean. Their story is a reminder that history isn't just about the loudest voices or the grandest monuments. Sometimes it's about the quiet, persistent presence of those who shape the world in subtle, lasting ways. In the end, the Phoenicians were more than just traders or mariners. They were pioneers of a new kind of empire, one built not on conquest, but on connection. Their legacy is a testament to the enduring power of ideas and the relentless human drive to explore, innovate, and connect. So, the next time you find yourself marveling at the wonders of our interconnected world, spare a thought for the Phoenicians, whose ancient wisdom continues to resonate in the modern age. In the coastal city of Carthage, where the Mediterranean breeze whispered through bustling markets and the scent of exotic spices filled the air, a young boy named Hannibal was growing up in a family that was anything but ordinary. This wasn't your average bring-your-kid-to-work-day kind of family. His father, Hamilcar Barca, was a military commander with a penchant for strategic genius and a healthy disdain for Rome. He was the kind of dad who would probably use bedtime stories as a chance to discuss military tactics and economic strategies. Talk about setting the bar high for family game nights. Carthage, at the time, wasn't just some quaint seaside town. It was a juggernaut of trade, power, and political intrigue. Think of it as the New York City of the ancient world, with a population hovering around 500,000 people, give or take a few thousand sailors and merchants. Its strategic location at the heart of the Mediterranean made it a hub for commerce, much like a Silicon Valley for ancient traders. Everything from precious metals to olive oil flowed through its ports, and the Carthaginians were the undisputed masters of the sea, boasting a fleet that could rival any naval power of the day. Now, let's talk politics. Carthage wasn't exactly a democracy like Athens, nor was it a monarchy like those favored by the pharaohs. Instead, it had a unique oligarchic system, where power was concentrated in the hands of a wealthy elite. The Carthaginian Senate, an assembly of the city's most influential families, wielded significant power. It was a bit like having a board of directors running a massive corporation, only with more togas and fewer PowerPoint presentations. Amidst this backdrop, young Hannibal was being groomed for greatness. His family, the Barcas, were practically Carthaginian royalty, with a lineage of military leaders and statesmen. But the most defining moment of his youth was a legendary promise to his father, an oath of eternal enmity against Rome. Picture a superhero origin story where the protagonist doesn't get bitten by a radioactive spider, but instead swears a vendetta against an entire city-state. "I swear," Hannibal is said to have declared, "that so soon as age will permit, I will use fire and steel to arrest the destiny of Rome." Talk about setting ambitious career goals. This oath wasn't just teenage rebellion against a rival city. It was a reflection of the simmering tensions between Carthage and Rome. The two powers had locked horns during the First Punic War, which ran from 264 to 241 BC, a 23-year epic that could have given any modern soap opera a run for its money in terms of drama. Rome had emerged victorious, snatching control of Sicily and leaving Carthage smarting from the loss. The peace was fragile, and the embers of conflict still glowed beneath the surface, waiting for a gust of wind or a fiery young general to fan them into flames. Carthage's economy, meanwhile, was a complex beast. It thrived on maritime trade, with ships crisscrossing the Mediterranean, bringing in goods and wealth from every corner of the known world. The Carthaginians had mastered the art of commerce, with a talent for negotiation that could make a modern Wall Street broker blush. But this prosperity came at a cost. Maintaining such an extensive trade network required a formidable navy, and building warships wasn't cheap. A single quinquereme, among the deadliest vessels of the era, could set you back around 100 talents of silver, roughly equivalent to millions of dollars today. Despite their affluence, the Carthaginians weren't exactly living in an idyllic utopia. The city's political climate was as volatile as its economic fortunes, with internal strife and factionalism occasionally flaring up. It was a juggling act of maintaining power, appeasing the mercantile class, and keeping the restless populace satisfied. Think of it as trying to keep several spinning plates from crashing down, all while an audience of Roman senators watched eagerly from across the sea. Hannibal's world was one of contrasts. He was surrounded by the opulence of Carthage's wealth, yet the shadow of Rome loomed large over his every step. His upbringing was steeped in military tradition, but his education also included the finer things: philosophy, strategy, and the occasional lesson in diplomacy. He learned that to conquer was not merely to win battles, but to outwit, outmaneuver, and outlast one's enemies. It was a lesson he would carry throughout his life, as he embarked on a path that would make him one of history's most formidable generals. As a young man, Hannibal would have witnessed the comings and goings of merchants and dignitaries, the ebb and flow of Carthage trade winds. He'd have seen ships laden with Iberian silver, North African ivory, and textiles from the east, all converging on the bustling docks. The city was a melting pot of cultures, languages, and ideas, a place where the old world met the new in a vibrant tapestry of commerce and conquest. Looking back, it's easy to romanticize Hannibal's story as one of destiny and divine providence. But the reality was far grittier. He wasn't driven by some mythical prophecy, but by a very real desire to restore Carthage's honor and secure its place in the world. The oath of enmity against Rome was more than just words. It was a declaration of intent, a young man's vow to change the course of history. And in a world where power was measured in fleets and armies, where the line between victory and defeat was razor-thin, it was a promise he was determined to keep. So, young Hannibal was all set to make his mark on history, and not by taking the easy route. Nope, he was more of a go big or go home kind of guy. And what better way to start than by rising through the military ranks like a comet blazing across the Carthaginian sky? We're talking about a prodigious ascent here. Hannibal wasn't just any soldier. He was the son of Hamilcar Barca, a man whose name alone could send shivers down Roman spines. By the age of 26, he was ready to command Carthage's forces, proving that nepotism can sometimes lead to some pretty epic outcomes. Now, let's dive into those first major campaigns of his. Hannibal cut his teeth in Iberia, modern-day Spain and Portugal, where the Carthaginian Empire was expanding faster than a pair of bell-bottom jeans in the 70s. By 219 BC, he had captured the city of Saguntum, a Roman ally, and effectively flipped the bird to the Roman Republic. It was a provocative move, like crashing a rival's party and making off with their birthday cake. The Romans were, unsurprisingly, not amused. But here's where things get juicy. Hannibal wasn't content with a simple skirmish in Spain. He had bigger fish to fry. He needed to strike at the heart of Rome, and what's the most dramatic, and frankly insane, way to do that? March an entire army, complete with elephants, across the Alps. Yes, elephants. Because why not add a touch of circus spectacle to your military strategy? Now, let's pause for a second to appreciate the sheer madness of this plan. We're not talking about a leisurely hike with a few buddies. We're talking about a 9-month odyssey that covered over 1,000 miles from Iberia to Italy, with an army of roughly 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 elephants. By the time Hannibal and his troops reached the Alps, winter was nipping at their heels like an overzealous chihuahua. Think of it as a medieval version of Survivor, but with more snow and fewer immunity challenges. Romanticized tales of this crossing often paint Hannibal as a hero leading his noble beasts through picturesque snowy landscapes. But the reality was a lot less Instagram-friendly. The Alps were a brutal environment, and Hannibal faced landslides, frigid temperatures, and hostile tribes who didn't exactly roll out the welcome mat. By the end of the crossing, his forces were battered, reduced to about 20,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. The elephants. Only a handful survived the ordeal, proving that size isn't everything when it comes to mountain climbing. Despite these staggering losses, Hannibal's arrival in Italy was nothing short of legendary. The Romans were caught off guard, like a deer in headlights, except the headlights were wielded by a Carthaginian general who had just performed the ancient equivalent of a mic drop. And it wasn't just his audacity that made him legendary. It was his tactical brilliance on the battlefield that cemented his reputation as a military genius. Take the Battle of Trebia in 218 BC, for instance. Hannibal used a classic pincer movement to encircle and decimate the Roman legions. He exploited the terrain and lured the Romans into a trap, proving that knowing your battlefield is just as crucial as knowing your enemy. It was a masterclass in strategy, and it showed the Romans that they were up against something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. Then there was the Battle of Lake Trasimene in 217 BC, where Hannibal pulled off one of the most audacious ambushes in military history. He hid his troops in the fog around the lake, striking the Romans when they least expected it. The result? A brutal rout that left Rome reeling and Hannibal with another victory notch on his belt. But let's not forget the economic context here. War isn't just about who has the biggest army. It's also about who can keep that army fed and funded. Carthage's economy was heavily reliant on trade, and maintaining Hannibal's forces in enemy territory was a logistical nightmare. It's one thing to march an army across the Alps. It's another to keep them supplied once they've arrived. Hannibal had to rely on local resources, raiding and pillaging Roman lands to sustain his campaign. He was essentially running a high-stakes game of economic survival, with Carthage's fortunes hanging in the balance. So, what made Hannibal such an exceptional leader? It wasn't just his strategic acumen or his daring tactics. It was his ability to inspire loyalty and courage in his troops, even in the face of overwhelming odds. His men followed him not just because they had to, but because they wanted to. And that, my friends, is the mark of true leadership. Hannibal's story is a testament to the power of determination and ingenuity in the face of adversity. He was a man who took the road less traveled, literally, and carved his name into the annals of history. But as with all great tales, there's more to come. Hannibal's journey through Italy was just beginning, and the Romans were far from beaten. The stage was set for a conflict that would test the limits of endurance, strategy, and resolve. Stay tuned, because this saga is far from over. So, as Hannibal's grand Italian tour was just heating up, let's dive into the juicy details of his most legendary performance, the Battle of Cannae. This is the kind of battle that military historians gush over, like they found the ancient world's equivalent of a unicorn. Picture August 2, 216 BC. The Roman Republic, still nursing the sting from previous defeats, decided it was time to throw everything but the kitchen sink at Hannibal. They assembled a mega army of about 86,000 soldiers, under the command of consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro. These two were like the ancient world's version of a buddy cop duo, only with a lot more at stake than a few donuts. Hannibal, on the other hand, rocked up with a mere 50,000 troops. Sounds like a recipe for disaster, right? But as any good tactician knows, size isn't everything. It's all about how you use it. And boy, did Hannibal know how to use it. His army was made up of a mix of Carthaginian soldiers, Iberians, Gauls, and Numidians, a veritable buffet of ancient multiculturalism. Now, the magic trick at Cannae was Hannibal's deployment. He arranged his forces in a crescent shape, with his weakest troops in the center. It was a classic bait-and switch. When the Romans charged, they were sucked into the center, thinking they'd finally caught Hannibal in a corner. But as they pressed forward, the Carthaginian flanks wrapped around them in a deadly embrace. It was like watching a python slowly squeeze the life out of its prey. The result? A massacre. Roman losses were staggering, with estimates ranging from 50,000 to 70,000 dead, one of the bloodiest days in military history. The Roman army was essentially annihilated, and Hannibal's reputation was cemented as a tactical genius. It was the kind of victory that made generals swoon and enemies tremble. But let's not get too carried away on the romance of the battlefield. Kenny wasn't just a brilliant maneuver, it was a psychological sledgehammer. Rome, the seemingly invincible superpower, was now visibly vulnerable. Their allies started to waver, questioning whether they'd backed the wrong horse in this epic race. Cities and regions that had been staunch Roman supporters began to flirt with the idea of switching sides, like fair-weather fans in search of a new team jersey. Hannibal's victory at Cannae sent shockwaves through the Roman psyche. The Senate, that venerable institution of togas and gravidas, was in full panic mode. They declared a national day of mourning, and the streets of Rome were filled with the cries of those who had lost sons, brothers, husbands. It was a rare moment of collective despair, and the city's power brokers scrambled to pick up the pieces. But here's the kicker. Hannibal, despite his overwhelming success, didn't march on Rome. This decision has been dissected more than your average biology class frog. Some say he lacked the siege equipment. Others argue he knew the Romans would never surrender their city. Whatever the reason, the decision not to attack Rome itself left the door ajar for the Republic to regroup. While Hannibal was riding the high of victory, keeping his army fed and fighting was no small feat. Rome controlled the seas, and Hannibal was cut off from direct support from Carthage. He had to be resourceful, living off the land and the spoils of war. This meant not just fighting battles, but also engaging in a high-stakes game of diplomacy and resource management. Think of it as a brutal game of civilization, but with much higher stakes and no safe function. Hannibal's campaign relied heavily on the local Italian towns and cities. Some welcomed him as a liberator from Roman oppression, while others needed a little more. Persuasion. His ability to maintain his army in hostile territory was a testament not just to his military skills, but also his political savvy. He had to convince these communities that Carthage, not Rome, was their best bet for a prosperous future. But let's not sugarcoat it. Maintaining an army of thousands, especially in enemy territory, was a logistical nightmare. Armies of the day weren't exactly traveling with MREs or food trucks. They relied heavily on foraging, requisitioning supplies, taking what they needed, and making alliances with local powers. This wasn't just a military campaign. It was an economic endeavor, one that required constant negotiation and occasionally brute force. Hannibal also had to keep an eye on his own troops, a melting pot of cultures with varying loyalties and motivations. Holding together this coalition required charisma, promises, and sometimes a touch of fear. His leadership style was a mix of the carrot and the stick, knowing when to reward and when to remind his soldiers who was in charge. Now, as dazzling as Hannibal's victories were, they came at a cost. The longer he stayed in Italy, the more strained his resources became. And while Rome was down, it wasn't out. The Senate, ever shrewd, tapped into its vast reserves of manpower and resources, slowly rebuilding its legions and fortifying its defenses. They adopted a new strategy, one of attrition, refusing to meet Hannibal in open battle, essentially running out the clock with a defensive game plan. This shift was a testament to Rome's resilience. While they licked their wounds, they were also learning from their mistakes, adapting to Hannibal's tactics and figuring out ways to counter them. The Roman war machine was slow to change, but once it did, it was a relentless force. As Hannibal's Italian campaign continued, the toll on his army and resources grew. He needed reinforcements and supplies from Carthage, but getting them was easier said than done. The Roman navy controlled the Mediterranean, making it nearly impossible for Carthaginian support to reach him. Hannibal was effectively on his own, isolated in enemy territory with a dwindling army. Yet, despite these challenges, Hannibal's audacity and tactical brilliance continued to earn him victories, even if they weren't as decisive as Cannae. His presence in Italy was a constant thorn in Rome's side, a reminder that their greatest enemy was still very much a threat. The psychological impact of Hannibal's campaign extended beyond the battlefield. Rome's allies, watching the repeated Roman failures, began to question their loyalties. Some defected to Hannibal's side, while others hedged their bets, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. It was a time of uncertainty and fear, as the Roman Republic struggled to maintain its grip on its territories. Hannibal's ability to sustain his campaign in Italy for over a decade was remarkable, a testament to his strategic genius and relentless determination. But the cracks were beginning to show. His resources were stretched thin, his army was weary, and his homeland, Carthage, was embroiled in political intrigue and reluctant to commit fully to his cause. So, as the curtain falls on this chapter of Hannibal's saga, the stage is set for the next act. Rome is down, but not out, and Hannibal, though victorious, is facing an uphill battle to maintain his momentum. The conflict is far from over, and the stakes are higher than ever. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the twists and turns of this epic struggle between two of history's greatest powers. While Hannibal's campaign in Italy was a masterclass in military audacity, it also served up a harsh reality check on the limits of charisma and cunning without backup. Sure, he was the ancient world's equivalent of a rock star, but even the best frontman needs a band. And here's where the cracks started to show. Despite his mind-bending victories, Hannibal struggled to secure the kind of lasting alliances he needed to topple Rome completely. It was like trying to host a party where everyone wants to enjoy the hors d'oeuvres, but no one wants to stay for the cleanup. The Italian city-states, those fickle friends, were hesitant to dive headfirst into the Carthaginian pool. Many were too cozy in their Roman bathrobes to swap them for Hannibal's new toga. Their reluctance wasn't just about loyalty, it was a pragmatic calculation. They'd seen Rome's resilience, how it rose, phoenix-like, from defeats, and they weren't convinced Hannibal could finish the job. So they sat on the fence, watching the drama unfold like it was the hardest soap opera on the peninsula. Meanwhile, back in Carthage, things were about as supportive as a wet cardboard box. The Carthaginian Senate was a hot mess of political intrigue and penny-pinching. They had the economic muscle to support Hannibal, sure, but they were more interested in protecting their own commercial interests than in bankrolling a war a continent away. It was like having a family that'd rather invest in a new yacht than pay your college tuition. Carthage's economy, after all, was built on trade, not warfare. They were the Jeff Bezos of the ancient world, more interested in profit margins than military conquests. For them, Hannibal's Italian adventure was a risky investment, one that threatened to drain resources and destabilize the economic status quo. They were like a tech company hesitant to back a risky startup, preferring the steady returns of established trade routes. So, instead of sending reinforcements, they sent excuses and the occasional care package, hardly the stuff of legends. This lack of support forced Hannibal to get creative with his resources, like a chef trying to make a gourmet meal out of canned beans and crackers. His army was like a mobile state, living off the land and constantly on the move to avoid the Roman net tightening around them. It was exhausting, not just physically but psychologically. His troops, a motley crew of Carthaginians, Iberians, Gauls, and Numidians, required constant motivation to keep marching and fighting in a foreign land. And let's address the elephant, or rather, the lack of elephants, in the room. Hannibal's supposed indecisiveness has been a topic of debate among historians who love to armchair general with the benefit of hindsight. The reality was far more complex. Hannibal was anything but indecisive. He was pragmatic. He knew when to fight, when to retreat, and when to hold his ground. But without reinforcements, his options were limited. The Roman strategy shifted from direct confrontation to attrition, like a marathon runner pacing themselves while their opponents sprinted ahead. They avoided head-on battles, opting instead to harass and starve Hannibal's forces. It was a war of endurance, and Rome had the stamina of a long-distance runner. This forced Hannibal into a defensive posture, a position he wasn't accustomed to, and one that gnawed away at the morale of his troops. Hannibal's dream of marching on Rome was slipping away, not because he lacked the will or the strategic genius, because war is as much about logistics as it is about tactics. He was the right man for a job with the wrong resources. It was a bitter pill to swallow, watching his grand vision unravel not on the battlefield, but in the shadowy corridors of Carthaginian politics and the gritty realities of economic warfare. As the years dragged on, Roman counterattacks became more frequent and more effective. They adapted, learning from their mistakes, and began to reclaim lost territories. The tide was turning, and Hannibal's Italian campaign was slowly being pushed back. Each Roman victory was a nail in the coffin of Carthaginian hopes, each defeat a reminder of the precariousness of Hannibal's position. Yet even as his fortunes waned, the legend of Hannibal grew. He was the boogeyman of Roman nightmares, the general who'd humiliated their armies and brought them to the brink of collapse. His name became synonymous with fear and respect, a testament to his prowess, even as his campaign faltered. The retreat from Italy wasn't a hasty retreat. It was a calculated withdrawal. Hannibal wasn't running. He was regrouping, preserving what remained of his forces for the inevitable showdown on Carthaginian soil. It was a strategic pivot, one that acknowledged the harsh reality that without Carthaginian support, he couldn't sustain a prolonged campaign on enemy turf. As Hannibal's army made its way back to Carthage, weight of the campaign pressed heavily on him. He had achieved the impossible, yet the cards were stacked against him. The Roman war machine, once a fractured entity, had coalesced into a formidable force, ready to take the fight to Carthage's doorstep. And so, the stage was set for the final act of this epic saga. Hannibal, the Lion of Carthage, was returning home, his spirit unbroken, but his dreams deferred. The battle for the soul of the Mediterranean was reaching its crescendo, and the world watched with bated breath. The end game was near, and neither side was willing to bow out gracefully. Stay tuned, because the story of Hannibal and the fate of Carthage is far from over. As Hannibal, the indomitable Lion of Carthage, returned home with the echoes of Roman legions still ringing in his ears, he walked into a world that had moved on in his absence. The Carthage he left was a booming, bustling metropolis, but the Carthage he returned to was a city licking its wounds, weary from prolonged conflict and political backstabbing that would make even the most seasoned Game of Thrones fan do a double take. The Carthaginian Senate, ever the bastion of self-interest and political intrigue, now had to deal with Rome on their doorstep, a Rome that was no longer the young upstart, but a seasoned, battle-hardened juggernaut. Hannibal's return was not exactly met with a ticker-tape parade. Instead, he was thrust into the political arena, where the battles were fought not with swords and elephants, but with words and alliances. He swapped his general's armor for a statesman's toga, diving headfirst into the murky waters of Carthaginian politics. It was a transition as stark as going from frontman to backstage manager, and it was here that Hannibal's skills as a strategist faced the ultimate test. He became a Suffete, one of Carthage's highest-ranking magistrates, effectively a role akin to a head of state. Only this state was more interested in trade deals than territorial conquest. Now, Carthaginian politics weren't for the faint of heart. The Senate was like a snake pit of rival families and factions, each with their own agendas, alliances, and vendettas. Hannibal's challenge was to navigate this labyrinth while trying to steer Carthage toward recovery and resilience. He proposed economic reforms, aiming to rebuild the city's battered treasury and stabilize its future. One of his key moves was to restructure the tax system, shifting the burden from the struggling populace to the wealthier classes, a move that earned him both allies among the common folk and enemies among the elite. But Hannibal's ambitious plans for reform were met with resistance. The ruling oligarchs had grown fat off the spoils of trade and were loath to relinquish their financial privileges. It was like trying to get a cat to take a bath, messy, loud, and ultimately futile. Despite his best efforts, Hannibal found himself increasingly marginalized, his reforms stifled by a Senate more interested in maintaining the status quo than embracing change. And then the unthinkable happened. As Rome's power continued to expand, Carthage found itself embroiled in yet another conflict, the Third Punic War. This was the final act in the long-running saga between the two powers, a war that would seal Carthage's fate. While Hannibal was not directly involved in the conflict, the shadows of his past loomed large over the proceedings. His legacy was a double-edged sword, a reminder of Carthage's potential greatness and its ultimate vulnerability. As the tides of war turned against Carthage, Hannibal faced a new threat, not from Rome, but from within. Accused of conspiring with Antiochus Roman III of the Seleucid Empire against Rome, Hannibal was forced into exile. It was a bitter twist for the great general, whose entire life had been devoted to the defense and glory of his homeland. His journey took him across the Mediterranean, from Tyre to Ephesus, and finally to Bithynia, where he served as a military advisor. Even in exile, Hannibal remained a thorn in Rome's side, offering his military expertise to anyone willing to challenge the growing Roman hegemony. Hannibal's final years were a far cry from the grandeur of his military campaigns. He was a man out of time, a relic of a bygone era in a world rapidly changing around him. His death in 183 BC, reportedly by suicide to avoid capture by Roman agents, was a somber end to a life marked by extraordinary highs and devastating lows. The myth of Hannibal, the fearless general who crossed the Alps with elephants and terrorized Rome, was now complete. But let's not sugarcoat his legacy. Hannibal was a master tactician, yes, but he was also a man whose ambition outpaced his resources. His story is often romanticized as that of a tragic hero, but in reality it was a tale of brilliant strategy hamstrung by the harsh realities of politics and economics. He wasn't just a symbol of defiance against Rome. He was a stark reminder of the limits of personal charisma and military genius without enduring support. From a historical perspective, Hannibal's impact on military strategy is undeniable. His tactics at battles like Cannae are still studied in military academies around the world as exemplars of battlefield ingenuity. The double envelopment maneuver he employed remains a gold standard in tactical brilliance, a testament to his ability to outthink and outmaneuver larger, more powerful forces. Yet, his inability to secure lasting alliances and reinforce his army underscores the importance of logistics and diplomacy in warfare, lessons that even modern leaders grapple with today. Hannibal's story also serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of overextension. His audacious campaign through Italy, though initially successful, ultimately faltered due to the lack of sustained support from Carthage. It highlights the critical need for strategic depth and the willingness of a nation to commit fully to its military endeavors. In the end, Hannibal's life was a complex tapestry of triumph and tragedy, of strategic brilliance and political frustration. His legacy is not just one of military prowess, but of the relentless pursuit of a vision in the face of overwhelming odds. He remains a figure of fascination, not just for his battles, but for what he represents, the enduring human spirit that dares to challenge the impossible. As we close the book on Hannibal's saga, let's remember him not just as the legendary general who brought Rome to its knees, but as a man who dared to dream beyond the confines of his time. His life is a testament to the power of vision and tenacity, a reminder that true greatness lies not just in victory, but in the relentless pursuit of one's goals, no matter how insurmountable the obstacles may seem. So, as you drift off to sleep, ponder the legacy of Hannibal Barca. Think of his indomitable spirit, his strategic genius, and the lessons his life imparts. A timeless tale of ambition, resilience, and the enduring quest for greatness.